Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I've never told this story outside of my closest circle, but I need to get it off my chest. It's been over 20 years now, but what happened that night in November still gives me chills whenever I think about it. It was November 12th, 2001. I was 17 at the time, living in Winston County, Alabama. Our church was putting on this Christmas play, and me and 3 of my friends were staying late to practice our parts. It wasn't anything fancy, just your typical small-town church production, but we took it pretty seriously. That night, rehearsal ran until about 8:45. We were all feeling pretty good about how things were coming along, just normal teenagers goofing around after practice. My cousin Jessica was with us. She's always been the wild one in the family. The 4 of us decided to head outside for some fresh air before our parents came to pick us up. Our church sat right at the edge of these dense woods. Typical Alabama forest that seemed to go on forever. The parking lot was small, just gravel really, and across from the driveway stood this row of tall pine trees. They were probably planted as a windbreak years ago, but they'd grown massive over time. It was dark out, that deep country dark where you can actually see the stars clearly. The church had those yellow security lights that cast everything in this weird glow, making shadows stretch out across the gravel. The air was crisp, not quite winter cold yet, but you could feel it coming. Jessica, being Jessica, decided it would be hilarious to run ahead and hide behind those pine trees, to jump out and scare us, classic teenage stuff. So she took off running while the rest of us, me, David and Ashley, hung back near the church doors, just chatting about the rehearsal and school stuff. After a couple minutes, we started walking toward the trees, figuring we'd pretend to be scared when Jessica jumped out. The whole time, I remember hearing all those night sounds, crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl, wind rustling through the pines. Normal stuff that I never thought twice about before. We were maybe halfway across the parking area when Jessica came tearing out from behind those trees, and I mean running. At first, I thought she was just really committed to the prank, but something was off. She wasn't laughing. She was screaming, not like playful screaming, but genuine terror. "Run! Go back!" she was yelling, her voice cracking. We all froze, confused. That's when I saw it. Behind Jessica, something massive stepped out from between the pine trees. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It was like when you see something that doesn't fit into any category your mind has prepared for. This thing was walking upright on 2 legs, but it was huge. Not like big guy, huge. I mean, it had to be at least 7 feet tall, probably taller. It stepped right onto the road that ran in front of the church, moving with these deliberate, heavy steps. The security lights caught it enough that I could see it clearly. It had this thick, powerful build with incredibly broad shoulders, like a linebacker but bigger. Its arms were unnaturally long, hanging almost to its knees. The whole body was covered in dark hair. In the yellowish light, it looked dark brown, or maybe black. I remember thinking how weird it was that my first thought wasn't bear, or even man in a costume. Something about the way it moved was just wrong. Too fluid for a costume, too purposeful for an animal. Its stride was long and steady, like it knew exactly where it was going. Jessica reached us, grabbing my arm so hard it left bruises. The 4 of us stood there, completely frozen. I couldn't even scream. It was like my throat had closed up. The creature, and I don't know what else to call it, didn't charge at us or anything. It just continued walking across the road toward the steep hill that rose up beside the church property. But then, as it started to climb the hill, it did something that still haunts me. It turned back to look at us. Not just its head, Its entire upper body rotated to look in our direction. I couldn't make out details of its face from that distance, but I felt it staring at us. There was intelligence in that look, awareness. It wasn't just some animal. It knew we were there, and it was acknowledging us. Then it just continued up the hill and disappeared over the rise. The four of us stood there for what felt like forever, but was probably only seconds. Ashley started crying. David was stuttering something about getting inside, but Jessica was just staring at the spot where the thing had disappeared, shaking. We practically ran back to the church, fumbling with the keys to get back inside. Once we were in, we locked the doors and huddled in the sanctuary. That's when Jessica finally told us what happened when she was hiding. She'd been crouched behind one of the bigger pines, waiting for us to get closer so she could jump out. She said she was just playing on her phone when she heard something moving in the trees behind her. At first, she thought it was probably a deer or something. They were common around there. But then she heard a branch snap, not like a twig, but like a substantial branch being moved aside. She turned around, and that's when she saw it. A hand, a massive hand pushing aside a pine branch. She said it was easily 3 times the size of a grown man's hand, with coarse, dark hair on the back of it. The fingers were long, ending in these black, thick fingernails that weren't quite claws, but definitely not human nails either. When she looked up, she caught a glimpse of its face peering down at her. She said its eyes were wide set and sunken, with a sloped forehead that came to almost a point at the top. She didn't get a clear look at the whole face, because as soon as she saw it, she bolted. We were all shaking by this point. David's dad was supposed to pick us all up, but he wasn't due for another 15 minutes. None of us wanted to go back outside, so we called from the church phone and asked him to honk when he arrived. When his car finally pulled up, we made a mad dash for it, piling in and locking the doors immediately. David's dad asked what was wrong, but none of us knew what to say. How do you tell an adult you just saw what could only be described as a Bigfoot without sounding crazy? On the drive home, we tried to rationalize what we'd seen. Maybe it was a bear walking funny, but bears don't walk upright for that long, and they definitely don't have hands that can push aside branches like that. A hunter in some weird ghillie suit, at night, near a church, moving like that? None of the explanations fit. By the time I got home, I was convinced we had seen a Bigfoot. There's just no other word for it. I know how that sounds. Trust me, I've spent 20 years knowing exactly how it sounds, but the four of us know what we saw. The weirdest part was the aftermath. We talked about it constantly among ourselves for weeks, but when we tried telling others, the reactions were predictable. Some people laughed. Some people thought we were making it up for attention. Some suggested we'd seen a man in a costume. My parents were concerned that we were all having the same hallucination and actually had us tested for carbon monoxide poisoning or drug exposure. All negative, of course. Eventually, we just stopped talking about it outside our group. Jessica had nightmares for months. Ashley refused to drive that road after dark. David became obsessed with researching Bigfoot sightings in Alabama. And me? I just couldn't shake the memory of how it turned to look at us, that deliberate movement, the intelligence behind it. It wasn't aggressive or threatening, it was just acknowledging us, like we had stepped into its world, not the other way around. I've been back to that church many times over the years. The pine trees are still there, taller now. The hill is still steep, leading up into denser woods. Sometimes I find myself staring at that spot, wondering if it's still out there somewhere. I've read about other sightings in Winston County over the years. Turns out the area has a history of strange reports dating back decades. Hunters finding weird footprints. Campers hearing unusual howls at night. But as far as I know, no one else has had such a clear sighting as we did. Jessica moved away to Tennessee a few years later and refuses to come back to visit. She says she can't even look at heavily wooded areas anymore without panicking. David eventually stopped his research, saying it was making him paranoid. Ashley and I are the only ones who still talk about it occasionally. I still drive by that church sometimes, especially when I visit my parents. Every time I slow down and look at those pine trees, and every time I get that same chill running down my spine, remembering how it felt to have something impossible step out of the darkness and into my reality. What's strangest to me now is not that we saw something unexplainable, but how quickly the world wanted us to forget it. How easily everyone dismissed 4 teenagers who had no reason to make up such a story. I wonder how many other people have seen things they can't explain, only to bury those experiences because no one would believe them. All I know is what the 4 of us saw that night was real. It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a man in a costume, and it wasn't mass hysteria. It was something that shouldn't exist according to science, but it does. And it was walking through the woods of Winston County, Alabama on a November night in 2001. Sometimes I wonder if it saw us as clearly as we saw it. If somewhere out there, that creature remembers the 4 terrified teenagers it encountered outside a small church. And sometimes, on dark nights when I'm driving past wooded areas, I catch myself looking a little more carefully at the tree line, wondering if something might be looking back. Story 2. I've never been the type to believe in monsters or anything supernatural. As a cop, I deal with real-world threats every day. I'm trained to observe, analyze, and stay calm under pressure. That's why what happened to me back in August 2014 has haunted me for so long. I've kept this to myself for almost 10 years, but I need to get it off my chest. It was a hot summer day when my buddy Mark suggested we go fishing at his grandmother's pond outside Sutherland. I had a rare weekend off, and the idea of spending a few hours in the quiet countryside sounded perfect. I'd been working overtime for weeks, dealing with the usual small-town problems, domestic disputes, drunk drivers, and the occasional petty theft. Nothing that would prepare me for what I was about to experience. Mark's grandmother owned about 30 acres of land with a decent-sized pond tucked away behind a stretch of pine and oak trees. The property had been in their family for generations, and they were pretty protective of it. No trespassing signs lined the fence, and they rarely invited outsiders. I felt privileged that Mark considered me close enough to bring along. We arrived around 2 in the afternoon. The sun was beating down hard, making the air shimmer above the gravel road. Mark's grandmother greeted us with glasses of sweet tea and warned us not to stay out too late because the woods get funny after dark. I remember laughing it off, thinking she was just being superstitious like many older folks in rural Oregon. Mark grabbed his fishing gear from the trunk of my car, and we headed down the worn path toward the pond. The walk was maybe a quarter mile through increasingly thick trees. I noticed how quiet it got the further we went in. No birds chirping, no squirrels rustling through the underbrush. At the time, I chalked it up to the midday heat. The pond itself was about an acre in size, with a small wooden dock extending maybe 15 feet into the water. The far side was heavily wooded, with trees growing right up to the water's edge. The near side, where we entered, had a clearing with tall grass and a few fallen logs that served as makeshift seating. As we approached the edge of the pond, I noticed something odd along the muddy bank. There were fish skeletons scattered around, not unusual for a fishing spot, except these weren't just discarded remains. These fish had been broken in half, snapped at the spine, with the meat completely stripped clean, not torn or chewed, stripped, like someone had run their finger down the bone and removed every bit of flesh in one go. "Hey Mark, look at this," I called, crouching down to examine one of the larger skeletons. It had to have been a decent-sized bass, but now it was just a clean, broken frame. Mark glanced over. "Probably raccoons or maybe a bear," he said with a shrug. "Grandma says there's all kinds of critters out here." But something didn't sit right with me. I've seen what raccoons do to fish. They tear at them, leave bits behind. And bears are messy eaters. These remains were too deliberate, too clean. Still, I didn't want to seem paranoid, so I nodded and followed Mark to the dock. We sat there for about half an hour, casting our lines into the still water. Not a single bite. The whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The water was too still, the forest too quiet. Even the insects seemed to be keeping their distance. "I'm gonna take a leak," Mark announced, setting his rod down on the dock. "Watch my stuff." I nodded, eyes fixed on the water's surface. Mark headed toward the trees at the edge of the clearing, disappearing into the shadows. I decided to examine those fish skeletons again. Something about them was bothering me, like an itch I couldn't scratch. I was crouched by the water's edge, holding one of the broken fish spines, when I heard it, a subtle shifting of weight behind me, like someone trying to move quietly but stepping on a twig. Not a snap, more like a gentle compression. My training kicked in immediately. I froze, listening intently. Another sound, a soft exhale, too deep to be Mark's. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Slowly, I turned toward the tree line, about 20 yards away. That's when I saw it. Partially hidden behind a large oak trunk was something that shouldn't exist. At first, all I could make out was dark, reddish-brown hair, like a rust color but deeper, almost mahogany, covering what I initially thought might be a bear. But bears don't hide behind trees. Bears don't peek out methodically like this thing was doing. It leaned out from one side of the tree, then pulled back and leaned out from the other side, like it was playing a game or testing to see if I could track its movement. Each time it emerged, I caught more details. Massive shoulders, impossibly wide, long arms that hung too low, and most disturbingly, a head that seemed to sit directly on those shoulders, with no visible neck. I remained frozen, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. My mouth went dry. Every instinct told me to run, but I couldn't move. I couldn't even blink. I was transfixed by the methodical way this thing was observing me. Then it took one wide stride into the open. God, I'll never forget that moment. Standing there, fully visible, was a creature that towered over any man I'd ever seen. Its proportions were all wrong. Too broad, too muscular, like someone had taken a heavyweight boxer and stretched him to impossible dimensions. The reddish-brown hair covered its entire body, thicker in some areas, sparser in others. Its head nearly touched a low-hanging branch, a branch I later measured at about 8 feet off the ground. But it was the eyes that hit me hardest. Dark, intelligent eyes, set deep under a pronounced brow ridge. They weren't animal eyes, but they weren't human either. They held awareness, curiosity, and something else I couldn't identify, something ancient. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few seconds. There was no aggression in its posture, just assessment, like it was taking my measure as much as I was taking its. Then a sound from deeper in the woods, Mark, probably heading back, broke the spell. The creature's head turned slightly toward the noise, and in that instant, my paralysis broke. I ran. I didn't yell, didn't warn Mark, didn't even think to grab anything. I just ran, faster than I've ever run in my life, straight back up the path toward Mark's grandmother's house. I didn't look back, not once. I could feel eyes on me the whole way, but I didn't hear pursuit. No crashing through underbrush, no heavy footfalls, just silence, which was somehow worse. I burst into the yard, sweating and gasping for breath. Mark's grandmother was on the porch and stood up immediately, alarm clear on her face. "What happened? Where's Mark?" she demanded. It took me several attempts to get words out. In the woods, by the pond, I saw something. Her expression changed then, from alarm to something like resignation. "Sit down before you fall down," she said, guiding me to a chair. "What did you see?" I couldn't tell her. How could I? I was a police officer. I was supposed to be rational, level-headed. So I lied. I said I thought I'd seen a bear and panicked. She didn't believe me. I could tell from the way she studied my face, but she didn't press. Mark emerged from the tree line about 10 minutes later, confused and irritated. "What the hell, man? You just ditched me out there." I mumbled something about feeling sick suddenly, needing to get to a bathroom. Another lie. Mark seemed skeptical but let it go. We packed up shortly after, and I drove us back to town in near silence, jumping at every shadow along the roadside. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that creature leaning around the tree, playing its bizarre hide-and-seek game. I kept replaying the moment in my mind, trying to convince myself it had been a bear or a man in some kind of costume, or a trick of light and shadow. But I knew better. The next day, I called in sick to work, something I rarely did, and drove back out to the pond alone. I needed to confirm what I'd seen, or at least find some evidence that would help me make sense of it. The logical part of my brain, the cop part, demanded proof. The pond was quiet, peaceful even. I approached cautiously, eyes scanning the tree line constantly. Nothing moved, no mysterious figures, no broken fish. I made my way to the oak tree where I'd seen the creature and examined the branch it had nearly touched with its head. Using a tape measure I'd brought along, I confirmed it was just over 8 feet from the ground. I searched the area for footprints, but found nothing conclusive. The ground was hard-packed, covered with pine needles and fallen leaves. Whatever had stood there had left no clear evidence of its passing. I spent an hour circling the pond, looking for hair, broken branches, anything that might validate what I'd experienced. Nothing. It was as if the creature had been a hallucination, except I don't hallucinate, never have. For years afterward, I jumped at unexpected movements in my peripheral vision. I stopped hiking alone. I even requested day shifts only, making up excuses about family commitments to avoid admitting the real reason. I didn't want to be out after dark anymore. I've never spoken about this to anyone, not even Mark. What would I say? That I, Officer James Wilson, a man trained to observe and report facts, had seen a Sasquatch, that I'd locked eyes with a creature that wasn't supposed to exist, that I'd run away instead of investigating like every instinct and year of training had told me to do. But it's been almost 10 years now, and I can't keep carrying this alone. I know what I saw. It wasn't a man hiding in the woods. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a trick of light or shadow. It was something else, something that watched me from that tree line with intelligence and purpose before vanishing silently into the forest. I still don't know why it showed itself to me that day. I don't know why it broke those fish in that particular way, or why it didn't make a sound when it moved. And I don't know why, in those few seconds we stared at each other, I felt not fear, but recognition, like it knew me, or something about me, in a way I couldn't understand. All I know is that the woods outside Sutherland hold secrets, and I was given a glimpse of one. I haven't been back to that pond since, and I never will. Some things, once seen, can't be unseen. Some encounters change you forever. This was mine. Story 3. I never believed in this stuff before it happened to me. Honestly, I used to laugh at people who claimed they saw Bigfoot or whatever. But after that night in the summer of 2003, I stopped laughing. I was 16 then, and what happened near Allegheny State Park in western New York completely changed how I see the world. It was early July, one of those perfect summer nights where the air feels electric and everything seems possible. Me and my best friend Travis Jenkins were hanging out by this old dirt road that ran past his cousin Jason's place. It was our regular spot. Nothing special, just a beat-up fence on the side of a rarely traveled road where local kids would meet up when we had nothing better to do. That night it was just me and Travis, leaning against the fence, talking about stupid stuff like video games and girls from school. We had 3 dogs with us, Travis's golden retriever Buddy, Jason's black lab Diesel, who always followed Travis around, and this scruffy mutt called Rex that belonged to Jason's uncle but roamed freely around the property. The dogs were just doing their thing, sniffing around and chasing each other through the tall grass. It was around 9 at night, and the moon was bright enough that we could see pretty clearly without flashlights. Across the road was this abandoned melon field that hadn't been farmed in years. It was completely overgrown with weeds and wild vines, with these scattered trees throughout it. We weren't paying much attention to it at first. It was just background, you know. But then I started getting this weird feeling. It's hard to describe exactly, but it was like a heaviness in the air. Like when you know someone's staring at you but you can't see them. I remember I stopped mid-sentence while talking to Travis, and he asked me what was wrong. "Don't you feel that?" I asked him. He looked confused for a second. Then I saw his expression change. He felt it too. "Someone watching us?" he said quietly. The dogs had stopped playing. They were all standing alert, facing the melon field, their ears perked up. That's when I really started to get creeped out. Animals know things before we do, right? I scanned the field, trying to figure out what was setting off my internal alarms. That's when I spotted it. This unusual shape behind a particularly thick tree about 50 yards into the field. At first I thought maybe it was just shadows playing tricks, but then I realized the shape was too solid, too deliberate. Something was pressed against the trunk of that tree, something massive and dark. "Travis," I whispered, not taking my eyes off the spot. "Look over there, behind that big tree with the split trunk." Travis squinted in that direction. "I don't see anything." Then he stopped abruptly. "What the hell is that?" What I initially thought was part of the tree was actually something hiding behind it, something hairy and huge. As we stared, I could make out what looked like a shoulder and part of an arm covered in dark hair. Whatever it was trying to hide but was simply too big for the tree to conceal completely. The dogs started going crazy then. Buddy and Diesel were barking frantically, but they wouldn't approach the road. Rex, who was usually the bravest of the three, was actually backing away, his tail between his legs. That's when I knew we weren't dealing with a person or a normal animal. Then came the sound that still haunts my dreams, a deep, rolling growl that seemed to vibrate through the ground and into my chest. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard, not a bear or a mountain lion or anything normal. It was deeper, more primal, and it carried this weird intelligence in it, like it was meant to be a warning specifically for us. I remember my legs felt weak, like they might give out. Travis grabbed my arm so hard it left a bruise I found the next day. We were frozen in place, watching as the thing slowly moved from behind the tree. It stepped into a patch of moonlight, and that's when we saw its entire form. I wish I could tell you it was just a bear or someone playing a prank, but what I saw was unmistakable. This thing was enormous, easily 7 or 8 feet tall. It was covered in dark brown or black hair that looked matted in places. It stood upright on 2 legs, but had this weird hunched posture with arms that hung lower than a person's should. Its head sat directly on broad shoulders without much of a neck, and its face, God, its face was this strange mix of ape-like and human-like features with a pronounced brow ridge. But it was the eyes that really got to me. They caught the moonlight and reflected it back with this reddish-amber glow. Those weren't animal eyes. There was something looking out from behind them, something that was sizing us up with an intelligence that felt ancient and wild. For what felt like forever but was probably only seconds, we just stared at each other across that dirt road. Me, Travis, the terrified dogs, and this creature that shouldn't exist. Then everything happened at once. The Bigfoot, because that's what it was, I know that now, suddenly moved toward us. It didn't charge exactly, but it took several purposeful strides in our direction, its arms swinging at its sides, and let out another one of those growls that seemed to shake the air itself. We ran. I've never run so fast in my life. We sprinted down that dirt road toward Jason's uncle's house about a quarter-mile away, the dogs racing ahead of us. I could hear heavy footsteps behind us, the sound of something large crashing through the underbrush alongside the road. I was too terrified to look back, convinced that if I did, I'd see it right on our heels. We'd made it maybe 100 yards when the footsteps seemed to slow and then stop. I risked a glance over my shoulder and saw the creature standing in the middle of the road, watching us flee. It stood there for a moment longer, then turned and moved back toward the melon field, disappearing into the shadows with surprising quickness for something so large. We didn't stop running. We reached the bend in the road where we were supposed to meet up with Jason and his friend Kyle later that night, and incredibly, they were already there. They'd heard the dogs barking and came to investigate. One look at our faces told them something was seriously wrong. Between gasping breaths, we tried to explain what we'd seen. Jason kept asking if we were pranking him, but Travis was literally shaking, and I'm pretty sure I was white as a sheet. We all decided to head straight to his uncle's house, none of us wanting to be out on that road any longer. Jason's uncle Bill was sitting on his porch when we all came rushing up, the dogs still acting nervous and staying close to us. He took one look at us and invited us inside, where we spilled the whole story. I expected him to laugh or tell us we were seeing things, but he just got this serious look on his face. "I believe you," he said, which shocked all of us into silence. Same thing happened to me about 5 years back, when I was deer hunting near that old melon field. According to Bill, he'd been in his tree stand early one morning when something massive walked directly underneath him. At first he thought it was a bear walking upright, but when it passed beneath his position, he saw it clearly, a Sasquatch, just like what we'd described. He said he'd never told anyone outside the family because he didn't want people thinking he was crazy or drunk while hunting. "There's a reason I don't go into those woods alone anymore," he told us. "And there's a reason Rex won't go near that field, even when he follows me everywhere else." We ended up staying at Bill's house until well after midnight, too scared to leave, even though my parents were going to kill me for being out so late. Bill called them and smoothed things over, saying we were helping him with a project and lost track of time. He didn't mention anything about what we'd seen. On the drive home, Bill insisted on driving us. We passed by that spot again. I made myself look out the window at the abandoned field. In the headlights, it just looked like any overgrown piece of land, nothing special or threatening about it. But I knew something was in there, something that wasn't supposed to exist. It's been 20 years since that night, and I've told this story to very few people. Most don't believe me, and I don't blame them. I wouldn't have believed it either if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. Travis and I don't talk about it much anymore, but sometimes when we get together, there's this moment where we'll catch each other's eye and know we're both thinking about it. I've done research over the years, looking into other sightings around Allegheny State Park. There are more than you'd think. Reports of large, hair-covered creatures moving through the trees, strange howls at night, footprints that don't match any known animal. Most people keep quiet about their experiences, afraid of ridicule. I understand that fear all too well. That area has changed a lot since 2003. The old dirt road got paved, and someone bought the melon field and cleared it for new construction, though nothing ever got built. Jason's uncle Bill passed away a few years back, but locals still talk sometimes about strange things happening around there. Hikers feeling watched, dogs refusing to go down certain trails, sounds in the night that don't belong to any local wildlife. I went back once, about 5 years after it happened, in broad daylight with Travis. We stood at the spot where we'd seen it and tried to convince ourselves that maybe it had been a bear or our teenage imaginations running wild. But standing there looking at that field, we both knew what we'd seen. The rational part of my brain still tries to explain it away sometimes. But then I remember those eyes looking back at me. Intelligent, aware, and completely wild. I remember the way my chest vibrated with that inhuman growl. I remember how even the dogs, animals that would chase after anything, refused to approach it. I don't go camping anymore. I don't hike in dense forests. I've turned down hunting trips with friends. Call it trauma or whatever you want. But something fundamental changed in me that night. The world got bigger, stranger, and more mysterious in an instant. And there are some mysteries that maybe we're not meant to unravel. So if you're ever near Allegheny State Park in western New York, and you get that feeling of being watched while walking near the woods, don't ignore it. Don't tell yourself it's nothing, and maybe don't stick around to find out what's watching, because some things once seen can never be unseen. Story 4. I still struggle to talk about what happened to me last fall. I've gone back and forth about posting this, but I need to tell someone who might actually believe me. My friends and family just look at me like I'm crazy or making it up for attention. I know what I saw. I know it was real. I'm a hunter, have been since I was a kid. My dad taught me everything about tracking, reading the land, moving quietly. I've spent more time in the woods than most people spend in shopping malls. I know the difference between a bear, a wild hog, a deer, and pretty much anything else that lives in East Texas. What I saw that day wasn't any of those things. It was late October, around 7 months ago. My buddy Chris had recently gotten access to a new hunting lease outside San Augustine. If you're not familiar with the area, it's deep in the piney woods region of East Texas. Beautiful country, but remote. Ancient pine forests stretch for miles, with thick undergrowth and forest floors carpeted in pine needles. Chris couldn't make it that weekend, but told me I should go scout it out since deer season was coming up soon. Just get a feel for the land, he said. See if you can find some good spots for stands. I'd done this kind of solo scouting hundreds of times before, so I didn't think twice about it. I got there around 8 in the morning. The weather was perfect. Cool but not cold, maybe 55 degrees with clear skies. I parked at the gate, grabbed my backpack with water, some jerky, my rangefinder, and a small first aid kit. I had my phone, but knew service would be spotty at best. I also brought my .357 revolver in a chest holster, standard practice for me when I'm in areas with wild hogs or the occasional aggressive coyote. The property was beautiful. Old-growth pines towered overhead, creating patches of sunlight and shadow on the forest floor. I spent about 2 hours walking the perimeter, marking potential game trails on my phone's GPS. The place had everything a hunter could want: water sources, natural funnels where deer would likely pass through, and plenty of signs of wildlife activity. Around 10:30, I started working my way toward the center of the property where Chris had mentioned there was a low ridge that might make a good vantage point. The ridge wasn't much, maybe 15 feet higher than the surrounding area, but in that flat country, even a small elevation change gives you a better view. I was moving slowly and quietly, not because I was hunting, but because that's just how I've learned to move in the woods. Walk a few steps, stop, listen, look around, then continue. I remember hearing a pileated woodpecker hammering away somewhere to my right and thinking it was a good sign. Birds don't make noise when predators are around. As I approached the base of the ridge, something felt different. It wasn't anything I could put my finger on, just a change in the atmosphere. The woods seemed quieter, though I could still hear distant bird calls. The air felt heavier somehow. I remember thinking maybe the weather was changing, so I glanced up at the sky through the canopy, but it was still clear blue. I started up the gentle slope of the ridge, watching my footing on the carpet of pine needles. I was about halfway up when I stopped to catch my breath and take a drink of water. That's when I felt it, that unmistakable sensation of being watched. Every hunter knows that feeling. It's primal. It bypasses your conscious mind and hits you right in the gut. I slowly capped my water bottle and slipped it back into my pack. My eyes scanned the trees around me, looking for the source of that feeling. Nothing seemed out of place at first. Then I saw movement just over the crest of the ridge, maybe 20 feet away from me. At first, I thought it might be a deer, but as I focused on the spot, I realized whatever it was much larger. I could only see the upper portion of something from about mid-chest up. It was partially concealed behind the rise of the ridge and some undergrowth. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It was massive, broad shoulders covered in reddish-brown fur or hair. The coloration wasn't uniform. It had different shades mixed in, darker in some places, lighter in others. The hair on its head was shorter, maybe 3 inches long, but it got progressively longer as it went down its body. Across what I could see of its chest, the hair was probably 5 inches long. But on its arms, Jesus, the arms, The hair hung down a good 18 inches, swaying slightly even though there wasn't much breeze. Its face was the most unsettling part. The hair there was lighter colored, almost like a thick beard, with patches of tan or pale brown. But it was the eyes that froze me in place. Dark brown, deep-set eyes that were unmistakably intelligent. They weren't the eyes of an animal. They were studying me, assessing me. I watched as its gaze moved from my face down to my chest, where my holstered revolver was, then to my hands, then back to my face. Neither of us moved. I couldn't have run if I wanted to. My legs felt like they were rooted to the ground. My mouth went completely dry. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. Time seemed to stretch out. What was probably only 10 to 15 seconds felt like an eternity. Its head wasn't pointed or conical like you see in some drawings or recreation shows. It was more oval-shaped, wide, with a pronounced brow. From my angle, I couldn't see any ears, though they must have been there, hidden by the hair or the angle. Then, without any warning or noise, it started to back away. It didn't turn around. It stepped backward, maintaining eye contact with me the whole time. It moved with an eerie deliberateness, not rushing, just removing itself from the situation. It stepped down the other side of the ridge into thicker woods, and I lost sight of it. What struck me then, and what still haunts me now, was the silence. This thing was huge. I'm 6 feet tall, and based on what I could see, it had to be at least 7 feet, probably taller. But it moved without making a sound. No breaking branches, no rustling leaves, no crunching pine needles. It was like it knew exactly where to place each foot, how to distribute its weight, how to part the brush without disturbing it. I stood there for what felt like forever, unable to move. My mind was racing, trying to categorize what I'd just seen. A bear? No, the proportions were all wrong, and bears don't move like that. Some guy in a costume, out here, miles from anywhere, perfectly silent, with eyes that looked right through me. No way. When I finally could move again, I didn't run. I backed away just like it had, keeping my eyes fixed on the spot where it had disappeared. I walked backward for maybe 50 yards before I finally turned around and headed straight back to my truck. I didn't run, but I moved quickly, constantly looking over my shoulder. The walk back to my vehicle seemed to take hours, though my phone said it was only about 40 minutes. I kept my hand on my revolver the whole time, though I don't know what good it would have done if that thing had decided to come after me. When I reached my truck, I threw my pack in the back and got out of there. I called Chris once I had cell service again, but I couldn't bring myself to tell him what happened. I just said I wasn't feeling well and had to leave early. I figured he'd think I was crazy if I told him the truth. For weeks afterward, I couldn't sleep properly. I kept seeing those eyes, feeling that intense gaze. I'd wake up at night thinking something was watching me through my bedroom window. I started researching online, looking at reports of similar sightings in East Texas. There were more than I expected, some dating back decades. I've spent my life in these woods. I know every animal that's supposed to be here. What I saw that day wasn't supposed to be here. It wasn't supposed to exist at all. But it does. The thing that bothers me most isn't the size or the silence or even those intelligent eyes. It's the way it assessed me, the way it seemed to understand what I was capable of. It saw my gun and understood what it was. It made a decision to retreat rather than confront me. That speaks to a level of intelligence that scares me more than any physical threat could. I haven't been back to that property. Chris thinks I'm being weird about it and keeps asking me to come hunting with him there. I've made up every excuse I can think of. I can't tell him the real reason, that I'm afraid of seeing that thing again, and even more afraid of not seeing it, of knowing it's there watching me, and I don't know it. I know how this sounds. I know most people reading this will think I'm making it up, or that I saw a bear and my mind played tricks on me. But I know what I saw. I've replayed that moment in my head 1,000 times. The image is burned into my memory. Those eyes, that deliberate movement, the impossible silence of something so large. Sometimes I wonder if it's still there, watching other hunters, deciding whether to show itself or remain hidden. Sometimes I wonder how many other people have seen it, but, like me, were too afraid of ridicule to say anything. I don't know what to call what I saw that day. Sasquatch, Bigfoot, whatever. The name doesn't matter. What matters is that it exists, it's intelligent, and it's out there in the woods of East Texas, watching, waiting, and for some reason, it let me see it and walk away. To this day, I can't explain why it showed itself to me or why it decided to leave instead of whatever else it might have done. All I know is that the woods I thought I knew so well are now filled with questions I can't answer and a presence I can't explain, and that's what terrifies me the most. Story 5. I've debated sharing this for years. It happened back in 1995, and I still get chills thinking about it. I was 23 then, living in rural Tennessee, and raccoon hunting was just something we did on weekends. Me and 7 buddies, Mitch, Ray, Derek, Bobby, Tim, Kyle, and Jason. We'd been hunting together since high school. That night started like any other hunt. We loaded up Mitch's old Ford F-150 with our gear and 6 coonhounds around 7 in the evening. It was early October, not too cold yet, but crisp enough that we all wore our hunting jackets. The mountains were thick with pine and oak, and the leaves had just started turning. Perfect raccoon hunting weather. We drove about 40 minutes from town, then turned onto this old logging road I'd found while scouting the week before. It was rough going, the kind of road that makes your teeth rattle. The headlights barely cut through the darkness as we crawled along, dodging potholes and fallen branches. "This better be worth it, Mike," Bobby complained from the back seat. "My ass is going to be bruised for a week." I just laughed it off. "Trust me, this area's crawling with coons. The dogs will have a field day." We made it about 3 miles down that road before it got too narrow for the truck. Mitch pulled over in a small clearing, and we let the dogs out. They were excited, sniffing the air and wagging their tails like crazy. We gave them the scent from an old raccoon pelt we kept for training, and they took off down the road, baying and howling. Normally we'd follow them on foot, but we decided to wait by the truck. It was getting late, maybe around 9:30, and we figured we'd let the dogs tree something first. We popped open some beers, turned on a small battery radio, and shot the shit while we waited. After about 45 minutes, I started getting worried. The dogs had gone completely silent. Anyone who's hunted with hounds knows that's unusual. They should be barking when they're on a scent, or if they've treed something. "Y'all hear the dogs?" I asked, looking around at the guys. Ray shook his head. "Not for a while now." "Try calling them," Derek suggested, shifting uncomfortably. Jason pulled out his whistle and blew 3 sharp blasts, our signal for the dogs to return. We waited, listening. Nothing. "Let's try again," I said, feeling a knot forming in my stomach. Jason blew the whistle harder this time, the sound echoing through the trees. We all stood there in the beams of the headlights, staring down the dark road. Still nothing. Then Kyle pointed. "Listen." We heard it then, the sound of paws pounding the dirt road, coming fast. But something was wrong. There was no baying, no excited barking, just the frantic scramble of dogs running. When they came into view in the headlights, my blood ran cold. All 6 dogs were racing toward us, like the devil himself was on their tails. These were experienced hunting dogs, not easily spooked, but they looked absolutely terrified, ears flat, tails tucked tight between their legs. "What the hell?" Bobby whispered. The dogs didn't slow down until they reached us. Then they tried to jump into the truck bed all at once, whimpering and shaking. We had to lift some of them up. Old Blue, Ray's best hound, was trembling so bad I thought he might be having some kind of fit. "Jesus Christ, what happened to them?" Tim asked, stroking his dog's head, trying to calm her down. "Something scared the shit out of them," I said, stating the obvious. Mitch was already getting behind the wheel. "Let's get out of here." Nobody argued. We all piled into the truck, the dogs safely in the back. Mitch started the engine and flipped the high beams on. We'd only gone about 100 feet when he slammed on the brakes so hard I nearly hit the dashboard. "Holy shit," he breathed. There, standing in the middle of the road, was something. I'll never forget it as long as I live. It was massive, at least 7 feet tall, maybe 8. It stood completely upright on 2 legs, silhouetted in the headlights. The shoulders were impossibly wide, like a linebacker's but bigger. Its arms hung down by its sides, longer than any human's should be. The thing was covered in what looked like dark brown or black hair. Not fur exactly, more like a shaggy coat. Its head sat directly on those massive shoulders with barely any neck. But what really got me was how it was just standing there, not moving, not running away from the lights or the noise of the truck, just watching us. "Is that a bear?" Kyle's voice cracked. "No way," I said, my mouth dry. "Bears don't stand like that, not for that long." And it wasn't a bear. I'd seen plenty of bears in my life. This was something else entirely. It wasn't hunched forward like a bear would be. It was standing fully erect, its posture almost human-like. We sat there, engine idling, for maybe 30 seconds, though it felt like hours. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The dogs were going absolutely crazy in the truck bed, barking and whining. Then Mitch started backing up, slowly at first, then faster. When we'd put about 50 yards between us and the thing, he stopped. We all climbed out, legs shaky, and huddled together at the front of the truck, the headlights still pointing down the empty road. "Did everyone see that?" Ray asked, his voice barely above a whisper. We all nodded. "What the fuck was it?" Tim's face was pale in the moonlight. "Bigfoot," Bobby said, then gave a nervous laugh. "I mean, what else could it be that big and standing like that?" "Don't be stupid," Derek snapped, but there wasn't much conviction in his voice. We stood there arguing in whispers for about 10 minutes, all of us describing what we'd seen, confirming details with each other. We were scared, sure, but also curious. It's hard to explain. It was like we'd seen something impossible, and part of me needed to know it was real. "We should go look," I finally said. "Are you out of your damn mind?" Jason hissed. "It's probably gone by now," I reasoned, "and there's 8 of us, all armed." We had our hunting rifles, though I'm not sure what good they would have done against something that size. Still, after another 5 minutes of debate, curiosity won out over fear. We got back in the truck, dogs still whimpering in the bed, and Mitch drove slowly toward where we'd seen the creature. When we reached the spot, it was gone. No surprise there. We got out, flashlights scanning the trees on either side of the road. That's when Ray called out, "Guys, look at this." We gathered around where he was pointing his flashlight. There, in the soft mud at the edge of the road, was a footprint, a single enormous footprint, exactly where the creature had been standing. I've been hunting my whole life. I know every animal track in these mountains. This wasn't anything I'd ever seen before. It was huge, maybe 16 inches long, with a massive big toe and only 3 smaller toes beside it. The impression was deep, suggesting whatever made it was incredibly heavy. "That's not human," Kyle whispered, stating what we all knew. "It's not a bear either," I added, kneeling down for a closer look. "Bears have 5 toes and claw marks." We were all crowded around the print when we heard it. A loud snap of a branch breaking in the woods to our right, no more than 30 yards away. We froze, then practically trampled each other getting back to the truck. Mitch floored it, the tires spinning in the mud before catching. We tore down that logging road like our lives depended on it, nobody speaking. The only sound the engine revving and the dog still whimpering in the back. About a mile from the main road, we got a flat tire. Just our luck. We had to stop and change it, all of us nervously keeping watch with our rifles ready. I've never seen a tire change so fast in my life. Once we had the spare on, we should have just kept going, but something nagged at me. That footprint. I needed a photo, some evidence of what we'd seen. "We should go back," I said. "Take a picture of that track." To my surprise, most of the guys agreed. I think we all needed something tangible, something to prove to ourselves that we hadn't imagined it. So we turned around and drove back to the spot, moving slower this time, all of us scanning the woods on either side of the road. When we got there, my heart sank. The footprint was partially destroyed. Tire tracks ran right through it. We drove over it when we left, Mitch realized. We all stared at what remained of the print. It was still recognizable as the same strange four-toed track, but now it had the pattern of Mitch's tire treads through the middle of it. "Wait a minute," Derek said slowly. "If we just now ran over it." Then it was made right before we first saw it. I finished his thought. The realization hit us all at once. The creature had been standing there in the road just seconds before we came around the bend. It hadn't been there long. It might have even been watching our truck from the woods before stepping out. We didn't stick around after that. We drove straight back to town, the dog still shaken even hours later. We tried to tell a few people what we'd seen, but you can imagine the reactions we got. Without a clear photo of that footprint, we had nothing but our word. We've been back to that area many times over the years, always in a group, always armed. Never saw anything like that again. The dogs, though, they never acted the same in those woods. They'd hunt anywhere else just fine, but take them near that logging road and they'd get nervous, staying close to us instead of running ahead. I still go hunting almost every weekend, but not for raccoons anymore, and never in that part of the mountains after dark. Sometimes when I'm alone in the woods, I get this feeling like I'm being watched. And I wonder if that thing is still out there, standing in the darkness just beyond the trees, watching and waiting. I don't know what we saw that night, I can't explain it, but I know 8 grown men don't imagine the same thing at the same time, and I know those dogs were terrified of something real, something that left a footprint unlike anything I've ever seen before or since. 28 years later, and I still wake up sometimes in a cold sweat, remembering those eyes reflecting in our headlights, eyes that shouldn't have been that high off the ground, eyes that were watching us just as intently as we were watching it. Story 6. I've been sitting on this story for almost 20 years now. I've told family, close friends, and even tried reporting it to local authorities, but nobody takes it seriously. They either think I'm making it up, or that I was drunk, or that I mistook a bear for something else. But I know what I saw that night in October 2004, and it still gives me nightmares. We were living in our old farmhouse just outside Greenfield, Massachusetts. It was a Wednesday night, nothing special about it. My wife Linda, our son Tommy, he was 11 then, and I were watching some reality TV show. I think it was one of those survival ones where they drop people in the wilderness. Tommy had gone to bed about 20 minutes earlier. It was around 9:30 at night, and it was that perfect fall weather, cool enough for a light jacket during the day, but you needed the heat on at night. Tommy had this weird collection of pets. He was always bringing home strays or convincing us to let him keep something unusual. At that time, he had this ornery rooster named Rusty that lived in a coop by the side of the house, and a pet raccoon named Bandit that we kept in a cage on the back porch. I know keeping a raccoon probably wasn't the smartest idea, but Tommy had found it as a baby after its mother got hit by a car, and he nursed it back to health. We just couldn't make him give it up. So we're sitting there watching TV when we hear this thump on the front porch. Not like someone knocking, like something heavy landing on it. The whole house shook a little. Linda looked at me and said, "What the hell was that?" Before I could even get up, we heard Rusty making this awful noise. Not his usual crowing, but this panicked, terrified squawking. I jumped up immediately. We'd had problems with coyotes and foxes before, and I figured something had gotten into the coop. I flipped on the porch light and yanked open the front door without even thinking. I'll never forget what I saw standing there. Never. It was tall, way taller than me, and I'm 6 foot. Had to be at least 7 feet. And it was white. Not like paper white, but a dirty, yellowish white. It was covered in this long, matted hair or fur that hung off its body like a horse's mane, especially around the shoulders and back. The body underneath looked almost human-shaped, 2 arms, 2 legs standing upright, but much bigger, much more muscular. It must have weighed 400 pounds, easy. But its face, God, its face. It had these eyes that caught the porch light and reflected back this pinkish red color. They weren't animal eyes, and they sure as hell weren't human eyes. They were something else entirely. The face was flat and wide, with a small nose and a mouth that seemed too small for the head. The thing had Rusty, Tommy's rooster, gripped in one of its massive hands. The poor bird was struggling and making these awful sounds. Before I could even process what I was seeing, this creature swung Rusty against the side of the house with this casual, almost bored movement. There was a thud and a flutter of feathers, and then the rooster fell to the ground. I remember feeling frozen in place. Linda was behind me, and I heard her gasp. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The creature and I just stared at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably only 2 or 3 seconds. Then it turned and started walking, not running, just walking with these huge, deliberate strides toward the back of our property where the woods start. That movement broke my trance. I slammed the door shut and locked it. What the hell was that thing? Linda was shaking, her face completely white. I don't know, I said, but it took Rusty. I ran to our bedroom and grabbed my .22 pistol from the lockbox in the closet. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. Linda was begging me not to go outside, but all I could think about was that this thing was on our property, and Tommy was sleeping upstairs. Call the police, I told her as I headed for the back door. Tell them, hell, I don't know what to tell them, just get them here. The backyard was dark, except for the small security light we had by the back porch. I could see the creature moving along the tree line about 50 yards away. It was still just walking, not running. Those long strides carrying it faster than a human could walk. I raised my pistol and fired 2 shots toward it. I'm not a great shot, especially at night, and I doubt I hit it. But it didn't even flinch or change its pace. It was like it didn't even notice. Something made me follow it. I don't know if it was adrenaline or stupidity or what, but I started after it. I jogged across the yard toward the trees, following this white shape that seemed to almost glow in the darkness. The ground was hard and dry. We hadn't had rain in weeks, and my boots made loud crunching sounds on the fallen leaves. I couldn't keep up with it. Those long strides carried it through the trees faster than I could follow. I was breathing hard, my heart pounding in my chest, but determined to see where it was going, or at least make sure it was leaving our property. I nearly clotheslined myself on our clothesline in the dark. It was stretched between 2 trees at the edge of our yard, and I didn't see it until the last second. I ducked under it, barely avoiding it. But then something struck me. The creature had walked right through this area moments before, and the clothesline was still perfectly intact. How had something that tall avoided it in the pitch dark? I lost sight of it after that. I stood there in the darkness, panting, straining my eyes to see any movement. Nothing, just the normal sounds of the woods at night. I waited for maybe 10 minutes, scanning the trees, before finally heading back to the house. When I got back, Linda was on the phone with the police. Tommy was awake now, standing in the living room in his pajamas, looking scared. I checked all the doors and windows, making sure everything was locked. "Dad, where's Rusty?" Tommy asked. I didn't know what to tell him. I remembered seeing the creature swing the rooster against the house, but I hadn't checked to see if it was dead. "I don't know, Bud. Let me look." I peered out the front window, scanning the porch with my flashlight. To my complete shock, Rusty was there, alive but dazed, huddled against the wall. I carefully opened the door and scooped him up. The rooster was missing some feathers and had a small cut on his wing, but otherwise seemed okay. It was unbelievable. I was sure that hit would have killed him instantly. That's when Tommy said something that made my blood run cold. "Dad, Bandit's gone." The raccoon's cage on the back porch was empty. The door was still latched, but Bandit wasn't inside. We looked everywhere, calling for him. Linda was still on the phone with the police, who clearly thought we were crazy or drunk. They said they'd send someone out, but I could tell from her expression that they weren't taking it seriously. "Frank," Linda called from the kitchen window, "look up there." I joined her at the window, and she pointed up. There, sitting on our roof, was Bandit. Somehow he'd gotten out of his locked cage and climbed onto the roof of our two-story farmhouse. The raccoon was just sitting there, staring off into the distance toward the woods, completely still. That's when we heard tires screeching on the road in front of our house. I ran to the front window just in time to see a car speeding away, leaving skid marks on the asphalt. It was a group of teenagers who often drove around late at night. They must have seen something that scared them. The police finally showed up about 20 minutes later. 2 officers walked around our property with flashlights, looking bored and skeptical. They found nothing, no footprints. The ground was too hard. No hair, no evidence at all of what I'd seen. They took my report, exchanging glances that made it clear they thought I was either crazy or lying. "You sure it wasn't a bear, sir?" one of them asked. "Bears sometimes stand on their hind legs." "It wasn't a damn bear," I said, probably too forcefully. "It was white, it was huge, it walked on 2 legs the entire time, and it had these eyes, these pinkish eyes." They left after about 30 minutes, promising to keep an eye on the area. I knew they wouldn't. We didn't sleep that night. We all stayed in the living room, Tommy eventually falling asleep on the couch while Linda and I kept watch. Rusty was in a box in the kitchen recovering. Bandit had finally come down from the roof around midnight, and we put him back in his cage, double-checking the latch. The next day, I went back into the woods, looking for any sign of the creature. Nothing. Not a single track or broken branch. I talked to our neighbors, but none of them had seen anything unusual. The teenagers who had sped away that night denied seeing anything when I tracked them down at the local high school. They claimed they were just racing, but I could tell from their nervous glances that they'd seen something. I've spent years trying to figure out what I saw that night. I've researched everything from escaped zoo animals to Bigfoot legends. The closest thing I've found are scattered reports of what some people call white Bigfoot or albino Sasquatch. But most of those reports come from the Pacific Northwest, not Massachusetts. Whatever it wasn't human, and it wasn't any animal native to this area. Its movements were too deliberate, too intelligent. The way it looked at me, there was something in those eyes, something that knew what it was doing. We moved away from that house 6 months later. Tommy was having nightmares, and honestly, so was I. We never saw the creature again, but I often felt like we were being watched when we went into the backyard. It's been almost 20 years now, and I've never told this story publicly before. People don't believe in things they can't explain, but I know what I saw that night. A 7-foot-tall, white-haired creature with pinkish eyes that could have killed me and my family, but chose instead to take a rooster, swing it against my house, and then walk away. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder if it's still out there in those Massachusetts woods, watching and waiting for reasons I'll never understand. Story 7. I've been debating whether to share this for the past 12 years, but I feel like I need to get it off my chest. My wife Claire and I have told some family about it, but we left out most of the details because, well, who would believe us? Even now my hands are shaking as I type this. It happened in early September of 2011. Claire and I were really into night fishing back then. We'd been married for about 6 years, and it was our thing. Our escape from the daily grind of work and bills. We'd head out around sunset with our gear, a couple of beers and some sandwiches, then fish until the early hours. That night, we drove out to Raystown Lake in Pennsylvania. It was a spot we'd visited maybe a dozen times before. Nothing special about it compared to our other fishing holes. Just a quiet dock that usually didn't have many people around, especially on weeknights. We arrived just before sunset, parked about 50 yards from the dock, and carried our gear down. The evening was perfect, warm with just a slight breeze, and the mosquitoes weren't too bad yet. By midnight, we'd caught a few small bass, nothing impressive, but we were having a good time. Claire was sitting at the end of the dock with her line in the water, and I was about 10 feet behind her, cracking open another beer. That's when we first heard it, a strange splashing sound from across the lake, not like a fish jumping or a deer coming down for a drink. This was different, heavier somehow. "Did you hear that?" Claire asked, turning to look at me. I nodded, squinting across the dark water. The moon was bright enough that we could see the tree line on the opposite shore, maybe 200 yards away. Another splash broke the silence. Definitely not a natural sound. "Probably some kids messing around," I said, trying to sound confident. Then it happened. A massive rock, I swear it was nearly the size of a bowling ball, came flying out of nowhere and crashed into the water just 6 feet from our dock. The splash was so big, it sent water onto the wooden planks where we sat. Claire jumped up. "What the hell was that?" Before I could answer, we heard it, a deep, guttural grunt or growl coming from the tree line across the lake. It wasn't a sound I'd ever heard an animal make before. Not a bear, not a coyote, nothing I could identify. "Rob, I think we should go," Claire whispered, already gathering her fishing gear. I was about to agree when another rock sailed through the air and landed in the water, closer this time. Then another. They were definitely coming from the tree line across the lake. We froze, watching as more rocks splashed into the water, like someone, or something, was deliberately throwing them in our direction. That's when I noticed movement along the shore opposite us. Something large was pacing back and forth at the edge of the trees. In the moonlight, I could make out a dark shape, tall and wide. It moved like a person, but bigger, much bigger. Every few seconds it would stop, bend down, and then another rock would fly across the lake. The growling continued, low and menacing. Claire gripped my arm so tight I could feel her nails digging in through my jacket. "Let's get out of here," I whispered, slowly backing up toward the shore. We'd taken maybe 3 steps when we heard another splash, this one behind us, from the direction of our car. I spun around, nearly dropping my fishing rod. There was another splash, then another, coming from the wooded area near the road leading to the dock. "Oh my God, Rob," Claire's voice was trembling. "There's another one." She was right. As we stood frozen on that dock, a high-pitched whooping sound came from the woods behind us, followed by more rocks splashing into the water. The creature across the lake responded with a deeper, louder call. That's when the horrible reality hit me. We were trapped. There was something in front of us across the lake, and something behind us blocking our path to the car. They were communicating with each other, calling back and forth across the water. For the next 2 hours, yes, 2 full hours, we sat huddled in the middle of that dock, too terrified to move. The creatures maintained this bizarre communication pattern the entire time. One would call out with that deep, throaty growl, throw some rocks in the water, and then the other would respond with higher-pitched whoops and its own rock throws. It was like they were using the water as a signaling system, playing some kind of game with us caught in the middle. Occasionally, we'd glimpse movement at both tree lines. The shapes were unmistakably human-like, but wrong. Too large, too wide through the shoulders and chest. I caught clearer glimpses of the one across the lake a few times when it moved through moonlit patches. It was covered in what looked like thick, dark hair, with huge shoulders and long arms. It had to be at least 7 or 8 feet tall. The one behind us stayed more hidden in the trees, but I could see branches moving and catch dark glimpses of something massive moving between the trunks. At one point, it let out a scream that made my blood freeze. Not quite human, not quite animal, but somewhere horribly in between. Claire was quietly crying beside me, and I was frantically trying to think of a way out. Our phones had no service, not unusual for that remote area. I considered making a run for it, but the thought of encountering that thing in the dark woods between us and our car was too terrifying. "What do they want?" Claire whispered after a particularly loud series of calls between the creatures. I had no answer. Were they trying to scare us off? Were they curious about us? Were they hunting us? The not knowing was almost worse than the fear. Around 2 in the morning, after what felt like an eternity, The rock throwing suddenly increased in frequency. The two creatures were now calling to each other almost constantly, their vocalizations growing louder and more urgent. The one across the lake seemed to be moving along the shore, possibly trying to circle around to join the other one. "They're going to trap us completely," I whispered to Claire. My mouth was so dry I could barely speak. Then, as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. The calls ceased. The rock throwing ended. The woods fell silent except for the normal sounds of insects and the gentle lapping of water against the dock. We sat motionless for at least 30 minutes, afraid to move, afraid to even whisper to each other. Finally, I stood up slowly, my legs cramped and stiff. "I think they're gone," I said, though I had no real reason to believe it. Claire looked up at me, her face pale in the moonlight. "What if they're waiting for us to move?" It was a possibility I didn't want to consider, but we couldn't stay on that dock forever. I listened intently, trying to detect any sound of movement in the woods. Nothing. "We have to try," I said. "We'll move slowly, stay together. I've got my fishing knife." As if a small knife would do anything against whatever those creatures were. We gathered our things as quietly as possible and began inching our way back toward shore. Every step felt like walking through quicksand, my body tense and ready to run. When we reached the end of the dock, we paused again, scanning the tree line. The path to our car was about 50 yards of open ground, then another 50 through the trees where we'd parked. I took Claire's hand, and we started walking, picking up pace with each step, until we were nearly running. We made it to the tree line without incident, but the forest felt suffocating now, the shadows between the trunks hiding potential threats. Our car was just visible ahead, moonlight glinting off its roof. We were maybe 20 yards away when a branch snapped loudly to our right. Claire gasped, and I pulled her forward, no longer caring about being quiet. We sprinted the rest of the way, fumbling with the keys, practically falling into the car. I started the engine and threw it into reverse before Claire's door was even fully closed, tires spinning on the dirt road as we backed out. As we sped away, headlights cutting through the darkness, I caught a glimpse of something in my rearview mirror. A large, dark shape stepping out from between the trees where we'd heard the branch snap. It stood there watching us leave, its outline unmistakable even at that distance. We drove home in near silence, both of us trying to process what had happened. When we finally spoke about it days later, we realized we both had reached the same conclusion. We had encountered 2 Bigfoot that night. It sounds ridiculous typing it out like this, but I know what I saw, I know what I heard. We told Claire's parents and my brother about the incident, but we left out most of the details. We said we'd been spooked by strange noises and decided to leave. How could we tell them the full truth without sounding completely insane? It's been 12 years now, and we've never gone back to Raystown Lake after dark. We still fish sometimes, but always in populated areas, always in daylight. I've spent countless hours researching similar encounters, looking for explanations, trying to convince myself it was all some elaborate prank, or that we somehow misinterpreted natural phenomena. But deep down, I know what happened that night. 2 creatures had us trapped, communicating with each other across that lake, watching us, studying us. Sometimes I still wake up hearing those calls echoing in my head, that deep, guttural growl and the high-pitched whooping response. And I wonder if somewhere in the forests of Pennsylvania they're still there, throwing rocks into the dark water, calling to each other in the night. Story 8. I've been debating whether to share this for years now. I'm not the type who believes in monsters or goes looking for trouble, but what happened that September in 2017 changed how I view the wilderness forever. I was working as a hunting guide for Rocky's Outfitters, just north of Hinton, Alberta. Good money, especially during elk and mule deer season. I'd been guiding for about 6 years by then and knew the foothills country better than my own backyard. My job was taking clients, mostly Americans, into remote areas where the hunting was prime, but the terrain was challenging enough that they needed someone who knew what they were doing. That particular week, I was assigned to guide a guy from Texas named Mark. Nice enough fellow, mid-50s, worked in oil and had all the expensive gear but limited backcountry experience. He'd booked a 5-day hunt focusing on bull elk. The outfitter had dropped us at an access point, and we'd hiked about 20 kilometers into the foothills to set up our wall tent camp. No roads, no cell service, just wilderness. The first couple days were uneventful. We spotted some cow elk, but no bulls worth pursuing. Mark was getting a bit anxious by the third day, which is typical for clients who pay good money and expect results. I assured him that patience was key and that the bulls would start responding to calls as the rut intensified. On that third evening, we headed out about 2 hours before sunset to a spot I knew well, a swampy meadow bordered by dense spruce forest that sloped up to a rocky ridge. Perfect elk habitat. The weather was unseasonably warm for September, maybe 15 degrees Celsius, with a light breeze. We positioned ourselves at the meadow's edge with good sight lines, and I started using a cow call every 15 minutes or so to try to draw in a bull. As the sun dipped below the mountains, the forest grew quiet in that distinct way it sometimes does, where it feels like everything is holding its breath. No birds, no squirrels chattering, nothing, just dead silence. I remember feeling a bit uneasy, but brushed it off as just the normal tension of the hunt. Then I heard it, distinct sticks breaking on the slope behind us. The sound was measured, deliberate. Not the hurried movements of a squirrel or the casual wandering of a deer. My first thought was that a bull elk was stalking in, trying to pinpoint the cow calls. They can be incredibly silent for their size, especially the mature ones. I motioned for Mark to kneel down and stay still. I slowly turned my head to scan the tree line behind us, my .308 ready but not raised. The light was fading, but there was still enough to see outlines clearly against the darker forest. That's when I spotted something between two massive spruce trunks about 70 yards up the slope, something dark and upright, swaying slightly from side to side. My first thought was a black bear standing on its hind legs to get a better look at us, which happens occasionally. But as I focused on it, I realized this was much taller than any bear I'd ever encountered, and the way it moved was different, more deliberate, more controlled. I froze completely, my heart suddenly hammering in my chest. Mark must have sensed my tension because he whispered, "What is it?" I just shook my head slightly, not taking my eyes off the figure. Then it moved. It stepped sideways into a small patch of fading light about 50 yards away, and I got my first clear look. What I saw still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. It was massive, standing well over 7 feet tall, maybe closer to 8. Its shoulders were incredibly wide, maybe 3 feet across, and its legs were thick as tree trunks. The proportions were all wrong for a human, but didn't match any animal I knew either. Its head appeared slightly conical on top, not rounded like ours. But what really struck me was the hair. Not fur exactly, but a covering of deep brown hair all over its body, with lighter streaks where the dying sunlight caught it. I remember thinking, this isn't happening, this can't be real. But it was right there, as solid and real as the trees around it. The creature made a sound then, a deep, resonant grunt that I felt in my chest more than heard with my ears. Then it did something that cemented this as no ordinary animal encounter. It bent forward, placing its long arms on its knees in an almost human posture, and studied us. I could see its eyes glinting from beneath a heavy brow ridge. It was observing us, analyzing us. There was clear intelligence in that gaze. Mark saw it too now and whispered, "Holy shit," under his breath. The creature's head turned slightly at the sound, focusing more intently on us. For what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 20 seconds, we were locked in this bizarre standoff. Me, frozen with my rifle halfway to my shoulder, Mark, trembling beside me, and this Sasquatch, watching us with what seemed like curious caution. Then it straightened to its full height again, which seemed even more imposing than before. It moved with shocking fluidity back behind the spruce trees. We heard it moving downhill toward the creek, its footsteps heavy enough to crack branches loudly. I finally found my voice and whispered to Mark, "We need to get back to camp. Now, stay close." We moved carefully, constantly scanning the forest around us. I kept my rifle ready, though I honestly don't know if it would have done much good. The entire walk back to camp I felt watched. The hairs on my neck wouldn't settle, and every shadow seemed to move. Back at the wall tent, we got a fire going and sat close to it. Mark kept asking what we'd seen, cycling through explanations. Was it a grizzly? Maybe a moose standing weird? Could it have been someone in a suit? But we both knew what we'd seen didn't fit any of those explanations. "That was a Sasquatch," I finally said, hardly believing the words as they left my mouth. "A fucking Sasquatch." Mark looked relieved that I'd said it first. "I thought I was losing my mind," he said. "That thing was looking right at us, man. It was thinking." We stayed up late, keeping the fire bright, neither of us wanting to sleep. When we finally did crawl into our sleeping bags around midnight, I kept my rifle right beside me. Around 3 in the morning, I woke suddenly. Something was brushing against the canvas of our tent. A soft, deliberate movement that traced the perimeter. Mark was still asleep, snoring lightly. I grabbed my rifle and the flashlight, my hands shaking so badly I could barely manage the tent zipper. I stepped outside, sweeping the light around the clearing where we'd set up camp. Nothing immediately visible, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. Then I noticed something by the creek, about 30 yards from our tent. The moss there was disturbed. I approached cautiously, my rifle ready, and shined the light on what were unmistakably footprints. Not animal tracks. Footprints. They were huge, half again larger than my size 12 boots, with 5 distinct toes, and a depth that suggested whatever made them was extremely heavy. I followed them visually without disturbing them. The stride length between prints was nearly 6 feet apart. I retreated to the tent and woke Mark. "We're leaving at first light," I told him. "Pack only what you need." We were packed and ready by dawn. I made the decision to cut the hunt short. Mark didn't argue. He was as spooked as I was. We hiked out faster than was probably safe, constantly looking over our shoulders. I kept thinking I heard heavy footsteps paralleling our route, just out of sight in the thick underbrush, but I never saw anything directly. When we reached the pickup point and met the outfitter, Mark immediately started telling him about our encounter. The outfitter laughed it off, clearly thinking we were exaggerating or had mistaken a bear for something else. No one took us seriously. I kept quiet after that. I filed my report about cutting the hunt short due to wildlife concerns, which technically wasn't a lie. The outfitter was annoyed but got over it. Mark went back to Texas with a story no one would believe. I continued guiding that season, but differently. I stayed in more open areas, kept to daylight hours strictly, and always had my rifle within reach. I'd spent my entire adult life in those mountains and forests, feeling comfortable and at home there. Now I felt like an intruder. What bothers me most isn't just that these creatures exist when science says they shouldn't. It's that the one we encountered was clearly intelligent. It knew what we were. It was curious about us. It checked out our camp. That suggests a level of awareness that makes me deeply uncomfortable about all the times I've been alone in the wilderness. I still guide occasionally, but I've mostly moved to fishing trips now, somewhere with fewer trees, more open space. I haven't told many people this story because I know how it sounds, but I know what I saw that evening north of Hinton, and I know that sometimes, when I'm in the deep woods and everything goes quiet, I'm not the only one doing the watching. Story 9. I've been holding this in for 42 years. I don't expect anyone to believe me, but I need to get this off my chest. It's eating me up inside, and every time I see a story about yowies, that's what we call our version of Bigfoot in Australia, I get this sick feeling in my stomach. It was May 20th, 1981. I was 14 at the time, and my 2 mates Andrew, 13, and Mikey, 11, were with me. We lived in rural New South Wales, about 2 hours from Sydney. Not much to do out there except explore, so that's what we did most days after school and on weekends. This particular day was unusually warm for May, autumn in Australia. We'd decided to explore some scrubby hills about 3 kilometers from Andrew's house. His dad had a cattle property that backed onto government land, just wild bush that stretched for miles. We'd packed sandwiches and Vegemite crackers, and Andrew's Kelpie dog Rusty came with us. Looking back, it started weird even before IT happened. Birds weren't singing like they usually did. The bush felt different, quieter. Rusty kept whining and staying closer to us than normal. He was usually ranging ahead, chasing lizards and sniffing everything, but that day he stuck to our heels like glue. "What's wrong with your dog?" I remember asking Andrew. He just shrugged. "Dunno, maybe he smells a snake or something." We'd been walking for about 2 hours, climbing up and down these small rocky hills covered in scrub and eucalyptus trees. The land out there is harsh, lots of sandstone, spiky plants, and not much water. We were following what might have been an old trail, though it could have just been a wombat track. I remember checking my Casio watch. It was around 2 in the afternoon. We stopped to drink some water from our canteens when Rusty suddenly went rigid. His ears perked up, and he made this sound I'd never heard before. Not a growl, not a whine, but something in between. "What is it, boy?" Mikey asked. But before the dog could react, we all saw it. About 7 or 8 meters ahead of us, where the path bent around a big boulder, 2 things walked right across our path. I say walked, but it wasn't normal walking. They moved upright on 2 legs, but there was something awkward about it, like they were uncomfortable walking that way, but did it anyway. They were covered in brown hair, not fur exactly, but more like shaggy hair that hung off their bodies, about 1.5 meters tall, with rounded heads that seemed to sit directly on their shoulders. No necks that I could see. They were bent slightly forward as they moved, arms hanging longer than a human's would. I remember the shock freezing me in place. None of us spoke. We just stood there, water bottles half raised to our mouths, watching these things cross our path. One of them, the one in front, suddenly stopped and seemed to stumble. It quickly moved behind a large gum tree, and then it peeked around at us. Actually peeked, like a kid playing hide and seek. Its face was mostly hidden by hair, but I could see its eyes. Dark, intelligent eyes that locked with mine. 5 seconds, maybe less. But it felt like forever. My skin crawled like it was covered in ants. My stomach dropped to my feet. This wasn't an animal, not in the way we understand animals. There was something else behind those eyes, something that recognized me as much as I recognized it wasn't normal. The second creature had stopped when the first one hid. It stood with its back to us, perfectly still. Then the one behind the tree made a sound, not quite a grunt, not quite a word, and joined its companion. They both disappeared into the thick scrub, moving faster now. We could hear them for maybe 30 seconds afterward, crashing through the underbrush, breaking sticks, rustling leaves. Then, nothing. Rusty went mental. He started making these crying noises, not barking, but this high-pitched whine I'd never heard him make before or since. Then he bolted after them, disappearing into the bush. "Rusty!" Andrew shouted, finally breaking our paralysis. "Come back!" We were too scared to follow. We stood there for what felt like ages, but was probably only a minute or 2. Then Rusty came tearing back to us, panting hard, his eyes wide with what I can only describe as panic. He pressed himself against Andrew's legs, trembling. "What the hell were those?" Mikey whispered. He was white as a sheet. "Monkeys," Andrew suggested, but even he didn't sound convinced. "There aren't any wild monkeys in Australia," I said. My voice sounded strange, like it was coming from somewhere else, and monkeys don't walk like that. We debated what we'd seen as we hurried back toward Andrew's place. "Wombats? No, they don't walk on 2 legs. Kangaroos? No, their movement is completely different, and they don't have those proportions. Some weird feral people maybe, but why would they be covered in hair?" "They were yowies," Mikey said finally. My granddad told me about them. They live in the bush and stay away from people. I'd heard of Yowies before, Australia's version of Bigfoot or Sasquatch, but always thought they were just campfire stories. But what we'd seen wasn't normal. They weren't gorillas or chimps escaped from a zoo. They moved like they knew the land, like they belonged there more than we did. By the time we got back to Andrew's house, we'd convinced ourselves to tell his parents. His dad was a no-nonsense farmer who'd lived in the area his whole life. He'd know what we saw, but when we tried to explain, the words sounded ridiculous. Andrew's dad laughed and said we'd probably seen some weathered old kangaroos. His mum suggested wild pigs, though she must have known pigs don't walk on two legs. They didn't believe us, and after a while, we stopped trying to convince them. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those eyes staring back at me from behind the tree. I kept thinking about how it had hidden. An animal doesn't hide and peek like that. That's a thinking behavior, planning, curiosity. The next morning, I woke up with my eyes burning like they were full of sand. Mum thought I had conjunctivitis and put drops in, but they didn't help. For 3 days, my eyes got worse, red, swollen, and painful. The doctor in town couldn't figure it out, said it might be an allergic reaction to something in the bush. Then the nightmares started. I'd dream I was back in that moment, but instead of the creature hiding behind the tree, it would come charging at me. I'd wake up screaming, my sheets soaked with sweat, my eyes feeling like they were on fire. Mum was at her wit's end. The doctor's drops weren't working, and I wasn't sleeping. That's when our neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, suggested we visit her church. The pastor there, Reverend Walsh, was known for healing prayers. I wasn't keen, but Mum was desperate enough to try anything. So on Sunday, 1 week after the encounter, I found myself standing in front of Reverend Walsh while he placed his hands on my forehead and prayed. I'm not religious, wasn't then either, but something happened when he touched me. There was this warmth that spread from his hands into my eyes, and for the first time in days, the burning stopped. By that evening, the redness was gone. The nightmares stopped too. Just like that. Andrew and Mikey never had the same problems I did. We talked about it sometimes, just between us, trying to make sense of what we'd seen. Andrew thought maybe I was affected because I'd made eye contact with it. Mikey's granddad had told him stories about how some Aboriginal people believed making eye contact with certain spirits could make you sick. We never went back to that part of the bush. Never wanted to. We'd been on lots of adventures before, but that was the last one. Something about that day changed us. Changed me, especially. Over the years, I've read everything I could find about Yowie sightings in Australia. There have been hundreds of reports, many similar to what we saw. Some people think they're some kind of primitive hominid that survived in the vast wilderness of Australia. Others think they're something supernatural. I don't know what to think. What I do know is what I saw. I know those weren't any animal I can explain. I know what happened to my eyes afterward wasn't normal, and the way they healed wasn't either. I'm 56 now. I've never told this story publicly before. My wife knows, and my kids think it's just Dad's crazy bush story. But every now and then, when I'm driving through rural areas or camping, I find myself scanning the tree line, watching for movement. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the bush and it goes quiet, that special kind of quiet where even the insects stop, I get that same feeling we had that day. They're still out there. I don't know what they are or what they want, but they're watching. Sometimes I wonder if that creature and I recognized something in each other that day, some ancient connection between their kind and ours. Something that goes back to when we both shared this land long ago. Whatever it was, that 5-second stare changed me forever. And somewhere out there in the Australian bush, I like to think that creature remembers me too. Story 10. I've been sitting on this experience for months now, not sure if I should share it. Honestly, I'm still trying to process what happened that night back in September of 2023. I've always been skeptical about cryptid stories and Bigfoot sightings, but now I don't know what to believe anymore. It was the weekend of the full moon, and I had this brilliant idea to go camping with my ex-girlfriend Megan and our mutual friend Tyler. Yeah, I know how that sounds, camping with an ex, but we'd managed to stay friends after breaking up last year, and we both get along great with Tyler. We're all juniors at Penn State, and with midterms coming up, we needed a break from campus life. I suggested Michaud State Forest because it's only about an hour's drive from campus, and I'd been there once before with my family years ago. It's not one of those super popular spots that get crowded with other college students looking to party. We wanted somewhere quiet where we could just chill, maybe have a few beers around a campfire, and enjoy being away from civilization for a night. We left campus around 7 in the evening. Tyler rode shotgun while Megan sat in the back of my Honda Civic with our camping gear. The drive was pretty uneventful, just us, singing along to music and talking about classes. By the time we reached the forest entrance, it was already getting dark, maybe around 8:30 or so. The forest road was rough, all gravel and potholes. My little Civic isn't exactly built for off-roading, so I was driving super carefully, wincing every time we hit a bump. The trees on either side of the road were massive, tall pines that seemed to swallow up what little daylight was left. The forest was dense, way denser than I remembered from my childhood visit. We found this small, isolated campground about 2 miles into the forest. It wasn't really a proper campground with facilities or anything, just a few cleared areas where people could set up tents. There wasn't another soul around, which at first seemed perfect. Now I'm not so sure that was a good thing. I pulled into one of the campsites that faced a gentle slope with a small clearing beyond it. There were tall ridgelines visible in the distance, and the full moon was rising, casting this eerie silver light through the trees. It was actually pretty beautiful, in a haunting sort of way. By this point, it was around 9:15, and the temperature had dropped significantly. We decided to stay in the car for a bit to warm up before setting up camp. So there we were, windows up, heater running, just talking and deciding what we wanted to do for the night. Tyler was showing us some stupid memes on his phone, and Megan was complaining about her political science professor. That's when it happened. I was mid-sentence, something about wanting to roast marshmallows, when movement caught my eye through the windshield. Something, and I still don't know exactly what, ran through the clearing about 40 feet in front of us. It crossed from left to right in what felt like a split second. But time also seemed to slow down somehow. I remember freezing, my mouth still open, words forgotten. I remember thinking, that can't be right, I didn't just see that. But I did. We all did. What the fuck was that? Tyler's voice broke the silence, confirming I hadn't imagined it. The thing moved so fast, I'd estimate around 30 miles per hour, which sounds crazy for something running on 2 legs. Because that's what really got me. It was upright, running on 2 legs, but it wasn't human. No way in hell was that human. It was tall, maybe 7 or 8 feet, with this athletic build that reminded me of an Olympic runner, but wrong. The proportions were off. The shoulders were too wide, the arms too long. They swung lower than any human's arms should. The legs were long too, covering ground in these massive strides that no person could make. The moonlight was bright enough that we could see its silhouette clearly, but not enough to make out facial features or fine details. It was dark, not just shadowed, but dark like its whole body absorbed light. And the way it moved, it was fluid but powerful, like nothing I've ever seen before. For a second or two, none of us spoke. I think we were all trying to rationalize what we'd just witnessed. My first thought was bear, but bears don't run on 2 legs like that. Then I thought maybe it was some guy in a costume, but the speed and the proportions killed that theory immediately. Did you guys see that? Megan's voice was barely above a whisper from the back seat. Yeah, I managed to say, my mouth suddenly dry. I saw it. "We need to get out of here," Tyler said, and I could hear the panic building in his voice. "Now, Jason, start the car. We need to go." I didn't argue. My hands were shaking as I turned the key in the ignition. The headlights illuminated the clearing, but there was nothing there now. Whatever had crossed our path was gone, vanished into the thick forest on the other side of the clearing. I threw the car into reverse, not even caring about the camping gear in the trunk anymore. I backed up until I found a spot wide enough to turn around, then floored it back toward the main road. Nobody spoke as we drove. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something following us, but there was only darkness. Once we hit the main road, Tyler finally broke the silence. "What the hell was that thing?" "I don't know," I said, still gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. "It wasn't human." "Bigfoot," Megan said from the back seat. "That's what we just saw." I remember almost laughing at how absurd that sounded, but then I replayed the image in my head. The tall, upright figure running on two legs, the inhuman proportions, the incredible speed. And suddenly it didn't seem so ridiculous anymore. "Let's just get back to campus," I said, pushing the Civic as fast as I dared on the winding forest roads. We didn't talk much on the drive back. I think we were all processing what we'd seen, trying to make it fit into our understanding of the world. By the time we reached campus, it was close to 11:30 at night, and we'd convinced ourselves that we needed to go back in daylight to check the area out. So that's what we did. The next morning, we drove back to Michaud, and everything looked different in the sunshine. The forest was still dense, but it wasn't threatening anymore. It was just trees and dirt and birds singing. We found the campsite again and walked to the clearing where we'd seen the thing run through. In daylight, I realized how dense the underbrush actually was. The clearing wasn't really clear at all. It was full of brush, stumps, fallen branches and thick grass that came up to our knees in some spots. It would be difficult for a person to walk through slowly, let alone run at the speed we'd witnessed. We looked for tracks or evidence, but the ground was dry and packed hard. There was nothing obvious to see. No footprints, no broken branches, no tufts of hair caught on thorns. Nothing to prove that what we'd seen was real. But it was real. All three of us saw it, and we all described the same thing independently when we talked about it later. That's what gets me. 3 witnesses, all seeing the same impossible thing. I've spent hours researching Bigfoot sightings in Pennsylvania since then. There are more than you'd think, especially in the state forests. Some stories sound ridiculous, but others sound eerily similar to what we experienced. I went back to Michaud about a month later with my current girlfriend, Emma. I didn't tell her about what happened the first time. I didn't want to freak her out. Nothing unusual happened during that visit. We set up camp, had a nice fire, roasted marshmallows, and slept in a tent under the stars. It was perfectly normal, but I couldn't relax. I kept scanning the tree line, watching for movement. Every snapping twig made me jump. I barely slept that night, and I haven't been back since. I still don't know what to make of what happened that September night. I'm not saying it was definitely Bigfoot, I'm just saying it was something I can't explain, something that shouldn't exist according to everything I've been taught about the natural world. Megan, Tyler, and I don't talk about it much anymore. I think we're all a little afraid that if we acknowledge it too much, it becomes more real. Or maybe we're afraid people will think we're crazy. I mean, I get it. If someone told me this story a year ago, I'd think they were full of shit or had too much to drink, but I know what I saw. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I find myself wondering, if that thing is out there in Michaud Forest, what else might be hiding in the dark places of the world that we don't know about? I've never been much of a believer in the supernatural or cryptids or whatever you want to call them. I'm a biology major, for Christ's sake. I believe in science and evidence and rational explanations, but sometimes I think about how vast the forests in Pennsylvania are, thousands of acres of virtually untouched wilderness, and I wonder if maybe there are things out there that science hasn't documented yet. All I know for sure is that something crossed our path that night. Something fast, something tall, Something that moved like nothing I've ever seen before or since, and no matter how many logical explanations I try to come up with, none of them fit what all three of us witnessed. So I guess I'm left with a mystery, one I'll probably never solve, and whenever someone brings up Bigfoot or cryptids in conversation now, I just stay quiet. Because how do you tell someone you might have seen something impossible without sounding completely insane? I don't expect anyone to believe me. I'm not sure I would believe it myself if I hadn't been there. But it happened, and I can still see it in my mind as clearly as if it were yesterday. That dark figure racing through the moonlight, gone almost as soon as it appeared, leaving nothing behind but questions and the unsettling feeling that the world is stranger than we know. Story 11. I'm writing this down because I need to tell someone who might actually believe me. My husband thinks I just got spooked in the dark, and my friends have all but patted me on the head and changed the subject. But what happened to me 3 years ago in Logan County wasn't my imagination, and I haven't been hunting alone since. It was November 14th, 2015, during deer season. My husband and I have this routine where he drops me off at my deer stand before sunrise, then heads to his own spot about 2 miles away. That morning was cold. I remember my breath fogging up as we drove down the dirt road in our Jeep, with all our gear rattling in the back. "Text me if you get anything," he told me as he dropped me off at the edge of our hayfield, right where it borders the mixed woods. It was pitch black outside, maybe 4:30 in the morning. I had my rifle, backpack with snacks and water, and my red LED cap light so I could see without alerting any deer. "See you at noon," I whispered as he drove off. The Jeep's taillights disappeared around the bend, and suddenly I was completely alone in the darkness. I've been hunting since I was 12, so being alone in the woods doesn't usually bother me. I made my way to my stand. It's a metal platform about 15 feet up an old oak tree with a small seat and railing. I climbed up, got settled, and just sat there for about 15 minutes, letting the woods settle back into silence after my arrival. When I felt enough time had passed, I loaded my .30-06 rifle, making sure to be as quiet as possible. I switched off my cap light to let my eyes fully adjust to the darkness. Dawn was still about an hour away, and there was no moon that night, just stars peeking through the tree canopy. That's when I first heard it, a movement to my left, toward the edge of the hayfield, maybe 30 yards away. At first, I thought it was a deer, which would have been great, getting one that early, so I slowly turned my head in that direction. What I saw instead were 2 steady red lights, hovering about 30 feet away. They were positioned high, way too high, maybe 8 to 10 feet off the ground. They were close together, like eyes, but unlike any animal eyes I'd ever seen reflecting in the dark. These weren't reflections, they were actually glowing red. I froze completely. My heart started hammering so hard, I was afraid whatever it was would hear it. The lights remained perfectly steady for maybe 5 seconds, and then they blinked, twice, deliberately, like someone, or something, closing and opening its eyes. That's when I knew for certain I wasn't looking at a flashlight or some piece of equipment. This was alive. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was another hunter with some weird light setup. But who would hunt with bright red lights that would scare away any game? And why would they be positioned so high off the ground? Even a tall man on a ladder stand wouldn't have eyes 10 feet high. While I was still trying to process what I was seeing, the thing started moving. I heard heavy rustling sounds as it began walking diagonally away from me toward an old logging road about 50 yards to the northeast. The footsteps were heavy, not like a deer or even a black bear. Each step was deliberate, pushing down into the thick layer of autumn leaves with a weight that suggested something massive. I strained my eyes trying to make out a body shape, but it was too dark. All I could see were those red eyes moving through the trees, and all I could hear were those heavy footfalls crushing the forest floor. Whatever it was, it moved with purpose, not like an animal foraging or wandering. When it reached the logging road, the eyes stopped moving. They hovered there, motionless again. I realized I'd been holding my breath and let it out as quietly as I could. The stand felt suddenly flimsy, like a child's fort that wouldn't provide any real protection. Then came the sound I'll never forget as long as I live. It started as a low moan, almost like the rumble of a diesel engine far away. But it built. Oh God, how it built, ramping up into this powerful whoop that echoed across the entire ridge. The sound had this depth to it, this resonance that you could feel in your chest cavity. It wasn't like any animal call I've ever heard, and I've heard coyotes, bobcats, owls, and everything else these woods have to offer. This was different. This came from something with lungs bigger than anything that should exist in Kentucky forests. The vocalization lasted maybe 6 or 7 seconds, but it felt like forever. When it finally stopped, the silence that followed was almost as terrifying. I quietly clicked the safety off my rifle, though I wasn't sure what good it would do. What would I even be aiming at? Just a pair of eyes hovering impossibly high off the ground? I remained absolutely still, afraid that any movement would draw its attention back to me. After what seemed like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds, I heard it moving again. This time, it was heading away from me, down the ridge in the direction of our cattle barn, about half a mile away. The footsteps gradually faded, but I swear I could feel the vibrations through the tree for much longer than I should have. As the sounds disappeared, I finally allowed myself to breathe normally again, though my hands were shaking so badly I had to consciously grip the rifle to keep from dropping it. Dawn arrived about 45 minutes later, and I've never been so grateful to see the sun in my life. The woods looked normal in the daylight, just trees and fallen leaves and the occasional squirrel, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I stayed in that stand until 9 o'clock, not because I was still hoping to get a deer, but because I was too scared to climb down and walk back through those woods alone. When I finally did get down, I walked, no, I practically ran, along the edge of the hayfield all the way back to where our property meets the main road. I called my husband and told him I wasn't feeling well and needed to be picked up early. He noticed something was wrong right away when he saw my face. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said. I told him what happened, but even as the words came out of my mouth, I could see the skepticism in his eyes. He suggested it was probably just another hunter with some kind of special lighting equipment, or maybe even teenagers playing a prank. "And that sound?" I asked him. "How do you explain that?" He shrugged. "Could have been anything. A coyote with something caught in its throat, maybe even a bear, though I haven't seen one around here in years." But it wasn't a coyote or a bear. I know those sounds. This was something else entirely. When we got home, I started researching. I looked up every animal native to Kentucky that could possibly make that kind of sound. Nothing matched. I even played recordings of various animal calls, everything from elk to mountain lions, which aren't even supposed to be in Kentucky anymore. But nothing came close to what I'd heard. Then I started looking into red-eyed creatures. Most animals have green, yellow, or white eyeshine when light hits them in the dark. Red is uncommon, and self-illuminating red eyes aren't a feature of any known animal. That's when I stumbled across Bigfoot forums. I'd never given much thought to Bigfoot before. It seemed like a Pacific Northwest thing, not something that would be in Kentucky, but there were accounts from all over the Appalachian region describing similar encounters: unusually high eyeshine, powerful vocalizations, and heavy footsteps. One account in particular from eastern Tennessee described a whoop howl that sounded eerily similar to what I'd heard. Another from western Kentucky mentioned glowing red eyes at about 9 feet off the ground. I'm not saying that's what I saw. I honestly don't know what it was, but I know what it wasn't. It wasn't a hunter, it wasn't a known animal, and it certainly wasn't my imagination. I've gone back to hunting since then, but never alone. My husband and I always set up within shouting distance of each other now. I also don't use that particular stand anymore. We built a new one on the opposite side of the property, overlooking a different section of woods. Sometimes when I'm out there, especially as daylight is fading, I find myself scanning the tree line, looking for those red eyes. I've never seen them again, but occasionally, when the wind is just right, I think I can hear something moving through the forest, something heavy that doesn't belong there. The weirdest part? About a week after my encounter, I noticed unusual tracks near our cattle barn. They looked almost like bare human footprints, but were much larger and deeper than they should be, even for a big man. They appeared after a light snow and led from the woods toward the barn, then back into the forest. By the time I thought to take a picture, they'd already started to melt and blur. Our cattle were agitated for several days around that same time. They bunched together in the middle of the field instead of spreading out to graze, and they seemed jumpy, startling at sounds that normally wouldn't bother them. My husband said it was probably just coyotes making them nervous, but I'm not so sure. Whatever I saw that morning had been heading in the direction of our barn, and I can't help wondering if it paid a visit. I still go into those woods. This is my home, and I won't be chased away from it. But I'm more cautious now. I pay attention to sounds in a way I never did before. I look up into the trees more often, and I always make sure I'm back home before dark. I don't know what's out there in the forests of Logan County, but something is. Something that stands 9 feet tall with glowing red eyes and a voice that can shake the trees. Something that 3 years later, I still can't explain. Story 12. I've held on to this experience for almost 20 years now, and it still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. I've only told a handful of people outside our group, and most either think I'm crazy or just making stuff up for attention, but 6 of us saw the same thing that night, and none of us have been able to explain it since. It was the summer of 2005, right in the middle of July. I was 19, home from my first year of college, working a summer job and hanging out with my high school friends whenever I could. We'd all grown up in Barnesville, Georgia, small town, everybody knows everybody type of place. Nothing unusual ever happened there. That night, we'd gone to the local skating rink. Me, my best friend Kyle, his girlfriend Amber, my friend Jessica, and 2 guys from our high school, Matt and Chris. It was something we did almost every weekend that summer, just to have somewhere to go. The skating rink closed at 11, and we left around 11:30 after helping Kyle's cousin, who worked there, clean up a bit. All 6 of us piled into my old Honda Accord. It was only meant for 5 people, but Chris was skinny enough to squeeze in the back with the others. I was driving, Kyle was in the passenger seat, and the other 4 were crammed in the back. We were all laughing and sweaty from skating, windows down because my AC barely worked, music playing, just normal teenagers heading home on a summer night. It was almost midnight when we turned onto Gordon Road. If you're not familiar with Barnesville, Gordon Road is this winding 2-lane country road that cuts through some farmland and wooded areas. We all knew that road like the back of our hands. I'd driven it hundreds of times since getting my license. The night was clear with a nearly full moon, bright enough that you could see pretty well even without headlights. As we came around the first curve, past the old Baptist church, I noticed this weird fog hovering over the road. It wasn't thick, just this light mist that hung about shin-high over the asphalt. It looked almost like it was glowing in my headlights and the moonlight. I remember thinking it was strange because it hadn't rained, and it wasn't the right conditions for fog. The radio was playing some song. I think it was Green Day. And Kyle was in the middle of telling a story about his boss at the hardware store where he worked. That's when we all saw it at the same time. As we rounded the curve, this thing was running across the road from a thin patch of woods on the left toward the old cemetery on the right. When I first spotted it, it was maybe 100 feet ahead of us. I instinctively slowed down because of the curve, but also because my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It wasn't a deer, it wasn't a bear, it wasn't anything I'd ever seen before in my life. This creature was huge. I'd estimate between 6 and 7 feet tall. It was covered in light brown hair, kind of a dirty blonde color, except for its face. The face was dark, almost black skin from what I could see in my headlights. But the most disturbing thing was its proportions. Its arms were way too long for a human, hanging down past its waist, nearly to its knees. I got within about 50 feet of it before it disappeared into the cemetery. It never looked at us, never acknowledged our car at all. It just moved with this purposeful stride across the road on two legs, not running exactly, but moving quickly, like it had somewhere to be. In the second or two that my headlights fully illuminated it, I clearly saw its hands, massive things with what looked like black fingernails or claws that reflected in my headlights. Inside the car, everyone lost it at once. "What the fuck is that?" Kyle yelled, pressing himself back in his seat. In the back seat, Jessica screamed. Amber started crying immediately. Matt was yelling, "Go, go, go!" while Chris had ducked down between the seats. I don't know how I kept control of the car. My hands were shaking so bad on the steering wheel, but some part of my brain was still functioning enough to keep us on the road. As soon as the thing cleared the road, I hit the gas. The tires squealed a little, and we shot forward. "Did everyone see that?" I remember asking, my voice cracking. Everyone was talking at once. What the hell was that? Oh my God, oh my God. It wasn't human! Did you see its arms? Kyle, who was always the most level-headed of us, turned around in his seat. Everyone just calmed down for a second. We all saw it, right? We all saw the same thing. Everyone was nodding, wide-eyed. Jessica was still crying in the back seat. I was approaching the turnoff that would take us past the other side of the cemetery, and there was no way in hell I was going that way. Without even discussing it, I took a right onto Miller Road instead, which was a longer way home, but would bypass the cemetery completely. "Its hands," Amber said quietly from the back seat. "Did you see its hands? They weren't human." "It was like some kind of monkey," Matt suggested, but even he didn't sound convinced. "That was no monkey," Kyle said. "Monkeys don't get that big, and it was walking upright, perfectly upright." "Bigfoot," Chris said, and then gave a nervous laugh like he was embarrassed to even suggest it. Nobody laughed with him, because honestly, that was exactly what we were all thinking. But this wasn't the Pacific Northwest. This was central Georgia. There aren't supposed to be Bigfoot sightings here. We drove in silence for a minute, the only sound being Jessica's occasional sniffles as she tried to stop crying. "We grew up here," I finally said. "Have any of you ever heard any stories about something like that around Barnesville, even as a joke?" Everyone shook their heads. We all knew the local legends and ghost stories. The supposedly haunted bridge outside of town, the old abandoned house on Elm Street that kids dared each other to enter on Halloween. But nothing about a 7-foot hairy creature with a dark face and 2 long arms. The ride back to town was tense. We'd all started the evening as typical teenagers, not a care in the world. Now we were quiet, jumpy, checking the side of the road constantly. I dropped everyone off at their houses. Nobody wanted to hang out anymore. Kyle was the last one I took home. As he got out of the car, he leaned back in through the window. "We should go back tomorrow," he said, "in daylight, see if there's any tracks or something." I nodded, but the thought of going back there made my stomach knot up. "Yeah, okay, call me in the morning." I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thing crossing the road, its long arms swinging, those black claws catching the light. I kept trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was someone in a costume, some kid playing a prank. But the way it moved was so fluid, so natural. And who would be in the woods by the cemetery in a costume at midnight? The next day, Kyle, Matt and I went back. We parked on the side of Gordon Road, near where we'd seen the creature cross, and walked along the roadside, looking for any signs, footprints, broken branches, anything. We even ventured into the cemetery, checking between the old headstones where it had disappeared. We found nothing. No footprints, no hair caught on branches, no evidence at all that anything unusual had crossed there the night before. The ground was too hard from the summer heat to show prints anyway. Maybe we all hallucinated, Matt suggested as we walked back to the car. All 6 of us? The exact same hallucination? Kyle shook his head. No way. Over the next few days, we talked about it constantly among ourselves. We tried to find logical explanations. A bear walking upright? No, the proportions were all wrong, and bears don't have those long arms. Someone in a costume, but the movement was too natural, too fluid. A trick of the light, but all 6 of us saw the same details. Jessica refused to talk about it after that first night. She just shut down whenever we brought it up. Amber was convinced it was some kind of demon. Chris went the opposite direction. He started researching Bigfoot sightings online and found a few obscure reports from Georgia. Though nothing specifically from our area, I was caught somewhere in the middle. I knew what I saw wasn't normal, wasn't explainable by ordinary means, but I also wasn't ready to jump to supernatural conclusions. A couple of weeks later, Kyle and I drove out there again, this time with a flashlight and a camera, thinking maybe we'd catch something if we waited around at night. We sat in my car at the edge of the cemetery for 3 hours, both of us on edge the whole time, jumping at every sound. Nothing happened. We never saw anything. Eventually, we stopped talking about it as much. Summer ended, I went back to college, and the others moved on with their lives too. But that stretch of Gordon Road and that old cemetery have never felt the same to any of us. I still avoid driving that way at night when I go home to visit. In the years since, I've occasionally brought it up with the others when we get together. The memory hasn't faded for any of us. We all remember the exact same details: the height, the hair color, the long arms, the dark face, those black claws or nails, the way it moved with purpose, never acknowledging our presence. I've looked into local history, trying to find any legends or stories that might explain what we saw. There's nothing. I've searched online for similar sightings in central Georgia. A few vague reports exist, but nothing that matches exactly what we saw. The rational part of my brain still wants to find a logical explanation, but I've never been able to. 6 people don't share the same detailed hallucination. We weren't drunk or high. We were just normal teenagers driving home from a skating rink who saw something impossible. Whatever crossed Gordon Road that night in 2005 shouldn't exist according to everything I understand about the world, but it does exist. I saw it with my own eyes, and that knowledge that there are things out there we can't explain, creatures that defy categorization, has never left me. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, moving through the woods and cemeteries of central Georgia at night. And sometimes, when I'm lying awake at night, I wonder if it knows we saw it, if it remembers us the way we remember it. I still can't drive on Gordon Road after dark. I just can't. Story 13. I've been hesitating to post this for over a decade now. It happened back in July 2012. And I still get goosebumps thinking about it. My son had just turned 18 that summer, and I wanted to do something special with him before he headed off to college. We both love the outdoors, so I planned a week-long camping trip in the Bighorn Mountains in northern Wyoming. We left our home in Colorado late, around 8 in the evening, figuring we'd drive through the night and set up camp in the early morning hours. The plan was to avoid the July heat for the long drive and setup. My son Tyler slept most of the way while I drove, which was fine by me. The roads were empty, and I enjoyed the solitude. By the time we reached the mountains, it was somewhere between 3 and 4 in the morning. The sky was pitch black, no moon that night, just stars and our headlights cutting through the darkness. We were on this long, straight stretch of mountain road, looking for a turnoff that would lead us to a decent camping spot. I had a general area in mind, but wasn't dead set on any particular location. Tyler had just woken up and was helping me look for potential spots. The forest was thick on both sides of the road, tall pines creating walls of darkness beyond our headlights. We were talking about nothing important, just planning what we'd do over the next few days. Fishing, hiking, the usual camping stuff. That's when I noticed something weird ahead of us. maybe 100 yards away. There was this orange glow among the trees just off the roadside. At first, I thought it was one of those reflective markers they put along mountain roads, but something about it seemed off. "You see that?" I asked Tyler. "Yeah, what is that?" "Looks like someone smoking a cigarette," he said. The glow was flickering slightly, kind of like a cigarette ember would, but it was staying in one place. As we got closer, maybe 50 yards away now, I realized the glow was pretty high up, definitely not at ground level. It was eye level with the trees, which didn't make sense. Who would be standing in the pitch-black forest at 4 in the morning, holding a cigarette perfectly still? I slowed the truck down, more curious than scared at this point. The headlights were lighting up more of the area as we approached. When we got within about 20 yards, we both realized at the same time that the orange glow wasn't something on the ground or even a cigarette. It was at eye level in the trees, and then I saw it. Standing behind a large roadside rock was something. I'm still not comfortable calling it what I think it was, but I don't have a better explanation. This thing was huge. It was standing completely upright, not hunched over like a bear would be. Its head was human-like in shape, but bigger, much bigger than any human head I've ever seen. Those orange glows, they were its eyes reflecting in our headlights. Its body was thick and covered in what looked like dark hair or fur. I couldn't make out specific features in the split second we drove past, but the impression of size and mass was unmistakable. What really got to me was how it turned its head to follow our truck as we passed, not like an animal spooked by headlights, but deliberately, like it was studying us. "Holy shit, Dad, did you see that?" Tyler's voice cracked. He was twisting in his seat, looking back through the rear window. "I saw something," I said, trying to stay calm, though my heart was racing. "Probably just a bear." "That wasn't a bear," Tyler insisted. "Bears don't stand like that. And its eyes, did you see its eyes?" I had seen the eyes. That orange reflection wasn't like any animal eyeshine I'd ever seen in all my years of hunting and camping. It was different somehow, more focused, more intelligent. We drove another mile or so in silence, both of us processing what we'd seen. I finally pulled over at a small clearing, well away from where we'd spotted the creature. "Let's camp here tonight," I said. "It's open, good visibility all around." We set up the tent in record time, not bothering with much else besides getting inside and zipping up. Neither of us slept well. Every snapping twig or rustling leaf had us on edge. I kept my hunting knife and flashlight within reach all night. Morning came without incident, and in the daylight, it was easier to dismiss what we'd seen. We cooked breakfast and tried to laugh it off. "You know what we saw, don't you?" Tyler finally said over his bacon and eggs. I didn't answer right away. I'm a practical man, always have been. I don't believe in monsters or myths, but what we saw wasn't normal. "I don't know what we saw," I finally admitted, "but I think we should check it out in daylight. If it was a bear, there'll be tracks." Tyler nodded, though I could tell he was nervous about going back. Hell, I was too, but curiosity was getting the better of me. After breakfast, we packed up the truck and drove back to the spot where we'd seen the creature. The rock was easy to find, a large boulder just off the roadside, partially hidden by the tree line. We parked and approached cautiously. In daylight, the area looked so ordinary, so unthreatening. The rock came up to about chest height on both of us, and I'm 6 feet tall. Tyler's a bit taller. That meant whatever was standing behind it had to be at least 7 feet tall, probably more. We started looking around for tracks or any sign of the creature. The ground was hard and rocky, not ideal for leaving footprints, but we searched anyway. Tyler was the one who found the first sign, a broken branch about 8 feet up on one of the pines, snapped recently judging by the fresh sap. "Dad," he said quietly, "something big came through here." I was examining some disturbed undergrowth when I heard it, a rustling sound from deeper in the forest. We both froze, listening. Then came another sound, like something heavy moving through the trees, breaking small branches as it went. "Let's get back to the truck," I whispered, but before we could move, I caught sight of movement between the trees, maybe 30 yards away. Something tall, much taller than a person, was moving toward us. It wasn't rushing, just walking deliberately in our direction. As it got closer, I could make out more details. The creature had dark, reddish-brown hair covering its body. Its arms were long, hanging lower than a human's would, but it walked upright on 2 legs. Its body was thick, with wide shoulders, and its head seemed to sit low between those shoulders, like it didn't have much of a neck. It stopped about 20 yards away, partially hidden by a tree, but clearly watching us. Then it made a sound, a deep, guttural grunt that I felt more than heard. It wasn't like any animal sound I've ever heard. It had intent behind it, meaning. "Dad," Tyler whispered, his voice trembling. "What do we do?" I didn't answer because I honestly didn't know. My instincts were screaming at me to run, but I was afraid sudden movement might provoke it. The creature took another step toward us, then another. It was now close enough that I could see its face, a flat, broad nose, deep-set eyes under a prominent brow ridge, and a wide mouth. The face had an expression that I can only describe as angry or territorial. It grunted again, louder this time, and took another step forward. Then it did something that still haunts me. It raised one arm, holding it out to the side, palm facing us. The gesture was unmistakably a warning, too deliberate to be anything else. This wasn't an animal acting on instinct. This was a conscious communication. "Back away slowly," I told Tyler, keeping my voice as steady as possible. "Get to the truck, but don't run." We backed away step by step, never taking our eyes off the creature. It didn't advance further, but watched us retreat. When we reached the truck, I fumbled with the keys, nearly dropping them in my haste. We got in, and I started the engine. As we pulled away, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw the creature standing at the tree line, still watching us. We drove for about an hour, barely speaking, before finding another camping spot far away from the first location. We decided to stay. We'd driven all that way after all, but we didn't venture far from our new campsite for the rest of the trip. At night, we kept a fire going constantly and took turns staying awake. On our last night, we heard whistling sounds echoing through the trees. 3 distinct notes repeated over and over. They seemed to come from different directions, as if there were multiple sources. We packed up and left at first light. It's been 11 years now, and I've told this story to very few people. Most don't believe me, and I don't blame them. I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't experienced it myself. I've researched similar encounters since then, and learned that the Bighorn Mountains have a history of such sightings. Some call it Sasquatch or Bigfoot. The local Native Americans have their own names for it. I don't know what to call what we saw that day. All I know is that it was real, it was intelligent, and it was warning us away from its territory. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we hadn't backed away, if we'd stayed or tried to approach it. I'm glad we didn't find out. Tyler and I still go camping, but never in the Bighorns, and we never drive mountain roads at night anymore. Some things are better left alone, some territories better left unmarked on any map. I still check the rearview mirror more often than I need to, half expecting to see those orange eyes reflecting back at me from the darkness behind. Story 14. I can't believe I'm finally typing this out. It's been 3 weeks since that night at Arrowhead Campground, and I still wake up in cold sweats, thinking I hear those footsteps again. I've been debating whether to share this experience, but I need to tell someone who might understand or have gone through something similar. I've been camping my whole life. 22 years in the Army will do that to you. I've slept under the stars across North Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, and half a dozen other states during training exercises and personal trips. I know the woods. I know the sounds animals make. I know the difference between a raccoon shuffling through leaves and a deer stepping carefully through underbrush. What I heard that night in Uwharrie National Forest doesn't match any of those familiar sounds. It was late October, just before Halloween. My buddy Mark and I had been planning this trip for months. A 4-day getaway at Barden Lake to do some fishing, hiking, and just disconnect from the world for a bit. Mark's not as experienced as me outdoors, but he's no novice either. We've been camping together maybe a dozen times over the years. We arrived at Arrowhead Campground around 2 in the afternoon. The place was pretty empty. Tourist season was over, and the weather forecast showed temperatures dropping into the low 40s at night. Perfect camping weather, if you ask me. We chose campsites 14A and 14B, about 10 meters from the tree line, close enough to the woods to feel secluded, but not so deep that we'd be completely isolated. The sites were nice. Each had a fire ring, a picnic table, and enough flat ground for our tents. I set up my one-person tent at 14A, while Mark took 14B. We spent the afternoon gathering firewood, setting up our gear, and getting a fire going. Around 5 o'clock, we hiked down to the lake and fished until the sun started setting. Caught a couple of small bass, but nothing worth keeping. Typical for that time of year. After dinner, some freeze-dried camping meals and a couple beers. We sat around the fire trading stories and catching up. Nothing unusual happened that evening. We saw a few deer in the distance, heard some owls calling back and forth, and noticed a raccoon eyeing our cooler from the edge of the campsite. Normal stuff. Around 11, we decided to turn in. The temperature had dropped to maybe 45 degrees, and the fire was dying down anyway. I'm a light sleeper, another gift from the military. I fell asleep pretty quickly, but woke up around midnight to use the bathroom. Did my business at the edge of the campsite and was about to climb back into my tent when I noticed how still everything had gotten. No crickets, no owls, nothing. Just dead silence. That's when I first felt it. That prickly feeling on the back of your neck when you know something's watching you. I scanned the tree line, but couldn't see anything beyond the first few feet of forest where our lantern light reached. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, listening, before deciding I was just being paranoid and crawled back into my sleeping bag. I dozed off again, but woke suddenly sometime later. My watch said it was 1:15 in the morning. At first, I couldn't figure out what had woken me. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving through the dry leaves at the edge of our campsite. Step, crunch, step, crunch. It wasn't random like an animal foraging. It was methodical, careful. The footfalls were heavy enough to break small branches underfoot. Whatever it was big, and it was walking on 2 legs. Not 4, 2. The cadence was all wrong for a deer or bear. It sounded human, but heavier. Much heavier. I lay completely still in my sleeping bag, barely breathing. The footsteps continued, moving parallel to the campsite along the tree line. I could track the sound as it moved from left to right, stopping occasionally before continuing on. Then it stopped completely, right at the point in the tree line closest to our tents. I heard what sounded like breathing, deep, heavy breaths, not panting like a dog or the snort of a deer. It was the sound of something large drawing air deliberately through its nose or mouth. I don't know how long I lay there listening to that breathing. It could have been minutes or an hour. My heart was pounding so hard, I was sure whatever it was could hear it. Eventually, I must have fallen back asleep from sheer exhaustion and adrenaline crash. When I woke up at dawn, the first thing I did was check the tree line. I didn't see anything unusual, no obvious tracks or broken branches, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Mark emerged from his tent about 20 minutes after me. I had already started the coffee on our camp stove, trying to act normal. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes. "You sleep okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He shook his head. "Not really. Did you hear anything last night?" My stomach dropped. "Like what?" "Footsteps," he said, accepting the cup of coffee I handed him. "Around the campsite. Sounded like someone walking around out there." I nodded slowly. "Yeah, I heard it too. Around 1:30 maybe?" "Started earlier for me," Mark said, staring into his coffee. I woke up around midnight, heard something moving out there. At first I thought it was you going to take a leak, but then I realized the sound was coming from the woods. What do you think it was? I asked, though I already had a feeling what he was going to say. It wasn't a deer, he said immediately, or a bear, or any four-legged animal. It was walking on 2 feet, man. I'm sure of it. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. I thought the same thing. And it was big, Mark continued. Whatever it was heavy. You could hear the weight in each step, but it knew how to move through the woods, like it was trying to be quiet, but just couldn't help breaking some branches because of its size. We both went quiet for a minute, drinking our coffee. The thing that gets me, Mark finally said, is that it came right up to the tree line and then just stopped. I never heard it walk away. It's like it was standing there watching us. I heard the same thing, I admitted. It stopped right at the edge of the clearing, and I swear I could hear it breathing. You think it was a person? Some weirdo trying to scare us? I considered this. I don't know. It seemed too heavy for a normal person. And why would someone just stand there breathing? Why not actually do something scary? Or just leave? Mark nodded. Plus, there's no way a person could have left without making noise. I was awake for hours after the footsteps stopped, never heard it walk away. After breakfast, we searched the tree line for tracks or any evidence of what had been there. The ground was covered in leaves and pine needles, making it hard to find clear impressions. We found a few broken twigs and what might have been depressions in the soil, but nothing conclusive. We decided to stay. Maybe that was stupid, but we'd been planning this trip for months, and daylight made the whole thing seem less threatening. We spent the day fishing and hiking, but I couldn't shake the feeling we were being followed. Every time we stopped, I'd hear subtle movements in the distance, nothing distinct, just enough to make me think something was keeping pace with us from a distance. That night, we built the fire bigger than necessary and stayed up later, neither of us eager to crawl into our tents. We didn't talk much about what had happened the night before. It was like we both wanted to pretend it hadn't occurred. Around midnight, we finally turned in, both exhausted. I woke up again around 2 in the morning. The same footsteps were back, but closer this time. Much closer. They circled the perimeter of our campsite, staying just within the tree line. I could hear branches breaking under its weight, leaves crunching with each step. It was moving faster than the night before, less cautious. I reached for my flashlight but hesitated. Did I really want to see what was out there? What if shining a light provoked it? I lay frozen, listening as the footsteps completed a circuit around our campsite and then stopped directly behind my tent. I could hear its breathing again, louder this time, deep rhythmic breaths that didn't sound quite human. Then my tent moved, just slightly, as if something had brushed against it. I bit down on my fist to keep from making a sound. The breathing continued for what felt like an eternity. Then, without warning, there was a low, rumbling sound. Not quite a growl, not quite a groan. It was deep, guttural, and unlike anything I'd ever heard from a human or animal. It vibrated through my entire body. Then silence, complete silence. I didn't sleep again that night. When dawn finally broke, I was out of my tent in seconds. Mark emerged shortly after, looking even worse than the previous morning. "We need to leave," he said without preamble. "Now." I nodded. We packed up in record time, barely speaking. As we loaded our gear into the car, I kept glancing at the tree line. I couldn't see anything, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. Just as we were about to get in the car, Mark grabbed my arm. "Look," he whispered, pointing toward the edge of the forest. At first I didn't see anything, then I noticed what he was pointing at, a tree about 15 feet in from the edge of the clearing. One of its branches, about 7 feet off the ground, was broken. Not just broken, but snapped downward, as if something tall had pushed past it in the night. We got in the car and left without another word. It's been 3 weeks, and I still don't know what was out there. I've spent over 2 decades in the outdoors. I've encountered bears, mountain lions, and all manner of wildlife. What I heard those nights at Arrowhead Campground doesn't match any of them. I keep going over it in my head. The bipedal gait, the weight behind each step, the breathing. That unsettling, rumbling sound, the way it never seemed to leave, just stop and watch. Mark and I have talked about it a few times since then. Neither of us has a good explanation. All I know is that in all my years spending nights in the wilderness, I've never experienced anything like this before, and I've never felt so certain that whatever was watching us from the darkness wasn't human. Story 15. I've been debating whether to share this for years. Even now, almost 50 years later, I still wake up sometimes hearing those sounds in my nightmares. I've never told this story publicly because who would believe me? But after reading similar accounts here, I feel maybe someone will understand what John and I experienced that August night in '73. I was 22 then, and my boyfriend John was 24. We were both students at UC Berkeley and decided to take advantage of the last weekend before fall classes by camping in the Sierra Nevada mountains. John had this beat-up Volkswagen van that we'd take on weekend trips whenever we could get away from our summer jobs. We chose Ebbets Pass because it was supposed to be beautiful but not overcrowded like Yosemite. It's pretty remote, sitting at around 9,000 feet elevation near the Nevada border. I remember feeling excited as we wound our way up the mountain roads that Friday afternoon, despite fighting a nasty summer cold. I had tissues stuffed in my pockets and was guzzling cough syrup straight from the bottle, which John teased me about. We arrived around 4 in the afternoon and found this perfect spot on a granite outcrop overlooking a meadow. The view was breathtaking. Pine forests, wildflowers in the meadow below, and steep rocky terrain on the opposite side of the narrow mountain road. It felt so peaceful and isolated. We only passed 2 other vehicles on our drive up, and there wasn't another camper in sight when we arrived. Setting up camp was simple enough. We pitched our orange 2-person tent about 15 feet from where we planned to build the fire, unpacked our sleeping bags, and arranged our cooking gear. John was always particular about having everything organized just so. I remember feeling dizzy from my cold medication as I helped lay out our supplies, but the fresh mountain air felt good in my lungs. As the sun started setting, the temperature dropped quickly. That's one thing about high elevation camping. You can really feel the temperature swing from day to night. John got a fire going while I heated up some canned stew on our little camp stove. We ate watching the sunset, paint the mountains in these incredible shades of orange and purple. Everything felt perfect. By full dark, it must have been around 8:30 or 9. Our fire was dying down, and John decided we needed more wood to keep it going through the evening. He grabbed his flashlight and said he was going to collect some fallen branches from the meadow below our campsite. I remember feeling a flicker of uneasiness as he disappeared down the rocky path. But I told myself I was being silly. I was a grown woman, not some scared kid. I huddled closer to the fire, pulling my jacket tight around me. My cold was making me feel awful. Stuffy nose, pounding head, chills. I had taken more cough medicine and was feeling a bit disconnected from everything. That's when I first noticed something wasn't right. It started with just a feeling of being watched. You know that prickle on the back of your neck? Then I heard it, a soft crunch of pine needles somewhere in the darkness beyond our campsite. At first, I thought it might be John returning, but the sound came from the opposite direction. Then another sound, from a different spot. Then another. Whatever it was, it seemed to be circling our campsite, staying just beyond the reach of the firelight. I strained my eyes, trying to see into the darkness, but the fire had ruined my night vision. I called out, "John, is that you?" But there was no answer, just a momentary pause in the sounds, and then they continued more carefully now. I could hear occasional footfalls, snapping twigs, and this soft, guttural breathing noise that made my skin crawl. It didn't sound like any animal I knew, not a bear or a mountain lion. The breathing was too deliberate, too controlled. I grabbed a burning branch from the fire and held it out like a torch, scanning the darkness and calling John's name again, my voice cracking with fear. The thing, whatever it was, stayed just out of sight. I couldn't tell you how big it was or what it looked like, but I could feel its presence, something substantial, something intelligent. When I would focus my attention in one direction, the sounds would stop there and resume somewhere else, as if it knew I was listening and was deliberately avoiding detection. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 15 minutes, I heard John's voice calling up from the meadow. The relief I felt was overwhelming. As soon as I heard him, the sounds around the campsite stopped completely. John emerged from the path carrying an armful of branches, completely oblivious to what had just happened. I told him about the sounds, my words tumbling out in a panicked rush. He looked concerned but tried to reassure me it was probably just a curious deer or maybe a raccoon. I knew better. No deer moves like that with such deliberate stealth. No raccoon breathes with that deep, rumbling sound. But I let him calm me down because I desperately wanted to believe him. Around 10 o'clock, we noticed headlights coming up the mountain road, and to my immense relief, another camper van pulled into a spot about 75 yards from us. Just knowing other people were nearby made me feel safer. There were 3 of them, looked like college kids like us. They waved but didn't come over to chat, just quickly set up their site and built their own fire. John and I stayed up until around midnight, talking quietly by the fire. I kept scanning the darkness, but there were no more unusual sounds. Eventually, we decided to turn in. The temperature had dropped to near freezing, and my cold made me exhausted. We zipped ourselves into our sleeping bags inside the tent, and despite my lingering uneasiness, I fell asleep almost immediately. I don't know exactly what time it was when it happened, maybe 2 or 3 in the morning. I woke suddenly, completely alert, my heart hammering in my chest before I even consciously registered what had woken me. Then I heard it again, a roar that turned my blood to ice. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before or since. The closest I can describe is a combination of an elephant's trumpet and a lion's roar, but deeper, more guttural, and impossibly loud. It echoed across the mountainside, vibrating through the granite beneath our tent. It wasn't just loud, it was primal, ancient, and filled with rage. John shot upright beside me, his face barely visible in the darkness, but clearly terrified. "What the hell was that?" he whispered, his voice shaking. Before I could answer, we heard it. Heavy, deliberate footsteps moving through the forest on the steep slope across the road from our campsite. Whatever it was big and walking on 2 legs. Each step made a distinct thud that we could feel through the ground. The neighboring campers had heard it too. Through our tent, we could see their flashlights bobbing frantically as they scrambled around their site. Within minutes, we heard their van engine roar to life, and their headlights swept across our tent as they peeled out, tires spinning on the gravel road as they fled down the mountain. That's when the true terror set in. We were alone with whatever was out there, and it was getting closer. The footsteps moved deliberately down the steep slope toward the road, accompanied by the sound of small rocks and debris rolling downhill. Every few steps, the creature would stop and let out another one of those bone-chilling roars. It seemed enraged, like it was searching for something, or someone. I was shaking uncontrollably by this point, tears streaming down my face as I clutched John's arm. He was frozen, seemingly paralyzed with fear. We didn't dare move, didn't dare make a sound. Our flimsy tent suddenly felt like absolutely no protection at all. When the creature reached the road opposite our tent, we heard loud cracking noises, like wood being snapped with incredible force. The roars became more frequent, more furious. I remember thinking with absolute certainty that we were going to die. Then, like some miracle, we saw headlights coming around the bend. A car was approaching on the mountain road, probably locals or maybe early morning fishermen. As the headlights swept across the area, we heard the creature let out a different sound, almost a bark of surprise. And then it was moving again, but this time away from us, charging up the mountain slope away from the road. Each retreating footstep still vibrated through the ground, but they were quickening, becoming more spaced out as the creature bounded uphill at incredible speed. We could hear timber snapping and rocks tumbling as it fled up the mountainside, still occasionally letting out those terrifying roars, but now from further and further away. The car never stopped. They probably didn't see or hear anything unusual, but those anonymous travelers saved our lives that night. We sat in absolute silence for almost an hour after the sounds faded, too terrified to move, barely breathing. Eventually, as the first hint of dawn lightened the sky, John whispered that we should pack up and leave immediately. We moved mechanically, throwing our gear haphazardly into the van, not bothering to properly pack anything. As the morning light strengthened, I walked cautiously across the road to where we'd heard the cracking sounds. What I found made my blood run cold all over again. A young pine tree, about 6 inches in diameter, had been broken off about 4 feet from its roots. Not cut, not chewed by a beaver, broken, with the splintered wood and bark showing it had been snapped with tremendous force. We drove down that mountain in silence, both too shocked to really process what had happened. For years afterward, we rarely spoke about that night. Our relationship didn't last much longer, not because of what happened, but because of college and life taking us in different directions. But whenever we did talk in the years that followed, that night at Ebbets Pass would hang between us like an unspoken question. It wasn't until 20 years later, in the early 90s, that I finally told my story to someone who didn't look at me like I was crazy. His name was George, a researcher who collected accounts of unexplained encounters in the Sierra Nevada region. When I finished telling him what happened, he asked me something that sent chills down my spine. "Were you menstruating during this camping trip?" I was taken aback by the personal question, but answered truthfully. Yes, I had been. George nodded knowingly and explained that he'd documented multiple similar encounters in that region, and many involved women who were on their menstrual cycle. Apparently, whatever these creatures are, they can detect and are drawn to the scent. To this day, I don't know what was in those mountains that night. I've never gone camping again, and I still can't hear unexpected sounds in the night without that fear rushing back. Sometimes I try to convince myself it was just a bear, just the wind, just my imagination fueled by cold medicine. But then I remember the footsteps, the roars, the deliberate way it circled our camp, the broken tree. And I know that something found us that night at Ebbets Pass, something that shouldn't exist but does. Otoon. Story 16. This happened in the summer of 2003. I still get goosebumps talking about it. It's been 20 years, and I've never shared this with anyone outside our group. We all saw it, all 5 of us, and we all agreed not to tell anyone because, well, who would believe us? My friends and I, Jake, Megan, Tyler, and Chris, had been planning this camping trip to Michigan's Upper Peninsula for months. We were all in our early 20s, working crappy jobs, and desperately needed to get away. Chris had family in the area and suggested Lake Gogabik because it was supposedly beautiful and secluded. When we stopped for supplies at this tiny general store in Marinisco, the old guy behind the counter got really weird when we mentioned where we were heading. He kept asking if we were sure we wanted to camp on the north side of the lake. He said there had been strange happenings in those woods. Weird noises, missing supplies, campers getting spooked. I remember thinking he was just trying to scare us city kids. Tyler laughed it off. "Probably just wants to sell us bear spray," he whispered. We bought some anyway, plus all our food. Chips, hot dogs, marshmallows, those little cans of bean dip I used to love, some beers, and basic camping stuff. It was mid-July, unusually warm even for summer, probably in the high 80s. We parked at this small trailhead and hiked about a mile in. The forest was thick, tall pines and dense underbrush. It was so quiet except for the occasional bird or the wind in the trees. We found this perfect spot on a ridge overlooking a small pond. The ground was relatively flat, and we had a beautiful view of the water through the trees. We set up our 2 tents, one for the guys, one for Megan, and spent the afternoon swimming in the pond. The water was cold, but felt amazing in the heat. As the sun started setting, we gathered firewood and got a campfire going. Chris was always paranoid about bears, so he insisted we hang our food. We stuffed everything into this old pillowcase of mine and hung it from a branch about 15 feet up. Looking back, that detail matters so much. It was one of those perfect nights. The sky was clear, full of stars. We were drinking beers, roasting marshmallows, telling stupid stories. I remember feeling so content. Around 11 or so, we started hearing coyotes in the distance. At least, that's what we thought they were. By midnight, things changed. The first thing I noticed was this strange moaning sound, really low and distant. At first, I thought it might be the wind, but there was no breeze. Then Tyler mentioned it, and we all went quiet to listen. "What the hell is that?" Chris whispered. The sound was like nothing I'd ever heard before. Not quite a howl, not a growl, more like a deep, throaty moan that seemed to vibrate through the trees. It was coming from the north, far off, but definitely getting closer. "Maybe it's a cow moose," Megan suggested, but I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. We tried to joke about it, but none of us were laughing anymore. The fire was dying down, and nobody wanted to venture into the darkness to get more wood. The moaning stopped for maybe 15 minutes, and we thought whatever it was had moved on. Then we heard splashing, clear, unmistakable splashing from the pond below our camp. Heavy splashing, like something large was moving through the water. Then footsteps, heavy, deliberate footsteps crushing underbrush and snapping twigs. "That's not a deer," Jake whispered, his voice cracking. Whatever it was seemed to be circling the pond. We could track its movement by the sound, splashing in the shallow water, then heavy footfalls on the shore, more splashing as it crossed to the other side. It was methodical, like it was patrolling. Chris grabbed the flashlight, but I put my hand over it. "Don't," I whispered. Some instinct told me we didn't want to draw attention to ourselves. That's when Megan started crying softly. I don't think any of us were breathing normally at that point. The footsteps stopped for a moment, and in that silence, I swear, I could hear sniffing. Loud, deliberate sniffing, like something was catching our scent. "We need to get in the tents," Tyler whispered. "Now!" Nobody argued. We kicked dirt onto the remaining embers and back toward the tents, eyes straining in the darkness toward the pond. The footsteps had started again, but now they were heading up the ridge, toward us. We all piled into the larger tent, screwed the sleeping arrangements, and zipped it shut. The footsteps got louder, closer, accompanied by the sound of branches brushing against something large. Whatever it was big, really big. Then it stopped. It was right outside our campsite. I could hear heavy breathing, more sniffing. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. We were all frozen, huddled together in the middle of the tent. There was a moment of silence, then snap! The sound made us all jump. It came from the direction of the tree where we'd hung our food. Then we heard the tearing of fabric, followed by plastic wrappers being ripped open. "It's getting our food," Chris mouthed silently. More sounds followed, crinkling of bags, the pop of a container opening, and then the most unsettling sound, smacking and chewing, loud and wet. I was closest to the tent's mesh window. Moving slowly, barely breathing, I shifted just enough to peer out. The clouds had parted, and in the dim moonlight, I saw it. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing at first. It was squatting by the tree, massive and dark, holding something small in one enormous hand. It took me a second to realize it was one of our bean dip cans. The creature was licking inside it, tilting its head back to get every bit. With its other hand, it was rummaging through our torn pillowcase, pulling out more food. It was covered in thick, dark hair. Not fur exactly, but hair, all over its body. Its arms were enormous, muscular, with hands that looked almost human but much larger. Its legs were bent like it was comfortable squatting there, also muscular and hairy. I couldn't see its face clearly, just that its head seemed to sit low on its shoulders, almost like a gorilla but different. The smell hit me then, this strong, musky odor of wet fur, sweat and dirt. Not the rotting smell people sometimes describe, just the powerful smell of a wild animal. I must have made some small noise because it suddenly stopped licking the can and went completely still. We all held our breath. After what felt like forever, it went back to eating, finishing the bean dip. Then it tossed the can aside casually, almost like a person would. That's when it stood up. I've never been so terrified in my life. It stood smoothly, effortlessly, on two legs, upright, like a person. It was tall, 7 feet at least, maybe more. Its arms hung down past its knees. It just stood there for a moment, looking around, then turned and walked, not lumbered, over the ridge, and disappeared. None of us spoke for what must have been an hour. We were too scared to move, too scared to even whisper. Eventually, we fell into an exhausted, terrified sleep, all piled together in that tent. When the sun came up, I almost convinced myself it had been a nightmare. But then we unzipped the tent and saw the evidence. The pillowcase was shredded, bits of it scattered around. The can of bean dip was torn open, not like it had been opened normally, but like something had peeled it apart. Chip bags and snack wrappers were flattened, with what looked like bite marks punched through them. The branch where we'd hung our food was bent downward, like something heavy had pulled on it. We looked for footprints, but couldn't find any clear ones, just impressions in the dirt where something heavy had stood. The ground was too dry and rocky for good prints, but we did find our food scattered in a 20-foot radius from the tree. While we were examining the mess, we heard voices coming up the trail. It was another group of campers, 3 guys who'd been camping about half a mile higher up the hill. They looked as shaken as we felt. "Did you guys get hit last night too?" one of them asked. They told us something had gone through their camp, taken their food bag right from inside their vestibule, and scattered their belongings. They hadn't seen anything, they'd been too scared to look, but they'd heard the same moaning sounds we had. That was enough for us. We packed up in record time, not even bothering to eat breakfast. Nobody wanted to spend another minute there. The hike back to the car was tense. Every snapping twig made us jump. We kept looking over our shoulders, scanning the trees. We never talked about what we saw with anyone else. Who would believe us? We didn't even use the word Bigfoot among ourselves for months afterward. We just called it that thing at Lake Gogabik. I've been camping many times since then, but never in that part of Michigan. I know what bears look like. I know what moose sound like. This wasn't either of those. The way it moved, the way it stood, the way it used its hands. It was something else entirely. I still think about that bean dip can sometimes, how casually it licked it clean, how it tossed it aside when it was done. That's what gets me the most. Not just that it was this massive, unknown creature, but how deliberate it was, how almost human, yet not human at all. I don't expect anyone to believe me, but I know what I saw. All 5 of us do. There's something in those woods that science can't explain, and it changed everything I thought I knew about what's possible. Story 17. I've been debating for months whether to post this. I'm not looking for attention or trying to convince anyone of anything. I just need to get this off my chest because it still keeps me up some nights. This happened in the summer of 2000 when I was camping with 3 of my buddies in the Davis Mountains in West Texas. We were all in our mid-20s then, experienced campers who'd grown up exploring the outdoors together. There was me, Josh, Ryan, and Mike. We'd been planning this trip for months, wanted to really get away from everything, not just the marked campgrounds with bathrooms and picnic tables, but deep into the backcountry where you don't see other people. We hiked about 7 miles from the nearest parking area, well off any maintained trail. The Davis Mountains are beautiful but rugged, lots of elevation changes, thick brush in some areas, sparse in others. We found this perfect little clearing surrounded by scrub oak and juniper that gave us some privacy, but also had this amazing view of the valley below. It was remote enough that we felt like the only people for miles, which I guess we probably were. We spent most of that day setting up camp, gathering firewood, and exploring the area. The weather was perfect. That rare summer day in West Texas that's warm, but not scorching, with a slight breeze. By late afternoon, we had our tents pitched in a small semicircle and a decent fire pit dug out and lined with rocks. As the sun started setting, we got a good fire going. Nothing crazy big, just enough to cook on and provide some light. We'd just finished eating and were sitting around drinking beers, sharing stories. You know, the usual camping stuff. Ryan was in the middle of some ridiculous story about his boss when we heard it. This sharp, deliberate knocking sound from somewhere in the brush uphill from our camp, like someone taking two pieces of hardwood and striking them together. Knock, knock, clear as day. At first, I thought maybe it was a woodpecker, but it was too loud, too deliberate, and way too late in the evening for that. We all stopped talking at once. "You guys hear that?" Mike asked, even though it was obvious we all had. We waited, and about 30 seconds later, there it came again. Knock, knock, but from a slightly different direction, maybe 20 degrees to the right of the first one. Then a third set of knocks came from even further right. Whatever was making the sound was moving around us. Probably just a branch falling, Josh said, but I could tell from his tone he didn't believe that any more than the rest of us did. Then the first rock landed. I say landed because none of us heard it being thrown or rolling down the slope. It just suddenly appeared, tumbling to a stop about 20 feet from our fire. It wasn't huge, maybe the size of a baseball, but it definitely hadn't just fallen there naturally. We all grabbed our flashlights and started scanning the tree line. The brush was thick beyond the clearing, perfect cover for whatever was out there. The darkness between the trees seemed to swallow our flashlight beams. "Hello?" Ryan called out. "Someone there?" Nothing, just the soft crackling of our fire and the night insects. We were all on edge, but trying not to show it. "Probably just some local kids messing with us," Mike suggested. But we all knew we were way too far from any trailhead for that to make sense. That's when the truly bizarre part happened. A full-grown doe walked straight into our campsite, not cautiously or darting through like deer normally do near humans. She walked deliberately, calmly, right up to where we were sitting and stopped about 10 feet from the fire. If you've ever been around deer, you know this isn't normal behavior. They're skittish animals that bolt at the slightest human scent or sound. But this doe just stood there, head high, ears forward, completely alert, but showing no fear of us whatsoever. She wasn't looking at us, though. She was staring intently past us, into the darkness beyond our campsite. "What the hell?" Josh whispered. More rocks started landing around the perimeter of our camp. Not thrown at us exactly, but definitely not natural. One bounced off a tree trunk with a loud thwack that made me jump. That's when I saw it. About 40 yards uphill between two juniper trees was a large, dark figure standing completely upright. At first, my brain tried to make it a tree trunk or a shadow, but it was definitely not either of those things. It was broad, much wider than a human, and tall, maybe 7 or 8 feet. The darkness made it impossible to make out details, but the silhouette was unmistakably something standing on 2 legs that shouldn't have been there. I nudged Ryan, who was sitting next to me, and subtly pointed with my flashlight beam. He saw it too. I heard his sharp intake of breath. The figure remained completely motionless for what felt like forever, but was probably closer to a minute. Then, without any sound or movement I could detect, it simply wasn't there anymore. It didn't walk away or duck down. It just vanished into the darkness. "Did you guys see that?" Ryan whispered. Mike and Josh had both been looking in other directions, scanning the woods with their flashlights. "See what?" Mike asked, his voice tense. Before Ryan or I could answer, the deer took 2 steps closer to our group and stopped again, still staring intently into the darkness. She was now between us and where I'd seen the figure. Her ears were flicking back and forth, but she made no move to run away. I'll never forget what Mike said next. I think she's using us for protection. It sounds crazy, but in that moment it made perfect sense. This wild animal had sought us out because something out there in the darkness frightened her more than we did. We stayed frozen like that for a while, the deer standing guard while we scanned the darkness. Then Josh grabbed my arm and pointed downhill, in the opposite direction from where I'd seen the figure before. There it was again, or maybe another one. The same type of silhouette, partially hidden behind a large boulder about 30 yards away. This one seemed to be watching us, completely still, except for what looked like slight movements of its head. Jesus Christ, Josh whispered. The knocking sound started again, seeming to come from multiple directions now. The rocks had stopped, but occasionally we'd hear the brush rustle or branches snap from various points around our camp. None of us even suggested breaking camp or trying to hike out. It was pitch black beyond our fire's light, and whatever was out there seemed to have us surrounded. Our only option was to wait until morning. The deer stayed with us the entire night. After about an hour, she actually laid down behind Mike's camp chair, still facing outward toward the darkness. It was the most surreal thing I've ever experienced, this wild animal choosing to bed down right next to us, as if we had some unspoken agreement to protect each other. None of us slept. We kept the fire going all night, talking in low voices and scanning the tree line with our flashlights. Every once in a while, we'd catch glimpses of movement or what seemed like eyes reflecting our light, but never as clear as those two sightings of the upright figures. The knocking continued sporadically throughout the night. Sometimes it would stop for an hour, then start up again from a new direction. What struck me was that whatever was out there never made any vocal sounds. No howls, growls, or calls, just those deliberate knocks and the occasional rock. As the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, the knocking finally stopped. The deer stood up, shook herself, and for the first time looked directly at each of us in turn. I know how that sounds, but I swear she made eye contact with each of us, one by one. Then she simply turned and walked back into the brush, unhurried, as if whatever danger had been there was now gone. We waited until full daylight before we started looking around. We found several places where the undergrowth had been disturbed and what looked like large, barefoot tracks in a few muddy spots near the creek, about 50 yards from our camp. They were big, easily 15 inches long, but not clear enough to make out toe impressions or other details. We broke camp in record time and hiked out that morning without stopping. None of us said much until we were back at the car. Finally, Ryan broke the silence. So we're all in agreement about what that was, right? We were. I've never been one to believe in cryptids or monsters, but there's no other explanation that makes sense. Those were Bigfoot out there, at least 2 of them, and they had been hunting that deer. She came to us for protection, and for whatever reason, they wouldn't approach while she was with us. I've been back to the Davis Mountains since then, but never to that same area, and never without remembering the sight of that deer choosing human company over whatever was stalking her in the darkness. I still wonder about it sometimes. Why didn't they attack us? Were they just curious? Was there some territory thing going on? I don't know. But I do know what I saw. And sometimes when I'm having trouble sleeping and hear unexpected sounds outside my house, I remember those deliberate knocks and the dark silhouette between the trees. And I lie awake until morning.